Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting will come to order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. My name is Supervisor Malia Cohen. I'm the chair of this committee. And to my right is Supervisor Scott Weiner, who is the vice chair. And to my left will be Supervisor Kim, who will be joining us shortly. And I also want to welcome our colleague, Ms. Julie Christensen, who is going to be commenting on an item on this on the agenda today. Our clerk is Ms. Andrea Osbury. I also would like to recognize Jennifer Lowe as well as Leo De Assis, who will be broadcasting this meeting at SFGov TV. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements?
Yes, please silence all electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today may appear on the July 21st Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Could you please call item number 1?
Yes, item number 1 is ordinance amending ordinance number 28-15, construction emissions and minimization plan.
Thank you very much. I am the maker of this ordinance. And colleagues, so this ordinance includes some technical cleanup for amendments to an ordinance that the board passed earlier this year. This ordinance we passed required higher emission standards and equipment for the city public works projects. At the time we passed this ordinance, there was conflicting language about the ordinance's application to current city contracts. At the request of the city attorney, we have introduced this trailing ordinance to clarify these requirements, and it's also we're introducing trailing legislation just to clarify that these requirements are not retroactive and they only apply for future contracts. So, colleagues, if we could take public comment, I would like to ask for your support on this item. I don't think we have a presentation today from staff, do we? No, I don't think so. All right, let's take public comment on item number 1 on this piece of legislation. Okay, seeing that there's no member of the public that'd like to comment on this, public comment for item 1 is closed.
So I'll make a motion to move forward with recommendation.
Thank you. Motion made by Supervisor Kim and seconded by Supervisor Weiner. Madam Clerk, could you do a roll call vote?
On the motion?
Are
you recommending
yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to just make a request that we move this forward with a positive recommendation. Supervisor Kim, would you mind amending your motion?
I'm sorry, there was an amendment?
No, she made a motion.
I'd like you to amend your motion just for a positive recommendation. I don't...
Oh, okay, so that was actually my motion.
Oh, I misheard you.
Yeah, I made a motion with recommendation to the full board.
All right, then this motion passes unanimously. Let's move forward. Thank you. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 2?
Item number 2 is a motion rescinding the certification of the final environmental impact report for 8 Washington Street seawall project.
All right, thank you very much. We have Kristen Jensen from the City Attorney's Office to present on this item. Ms. Jensen, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you. I'm really here more to answer questions, but I did want to give a brief background so that everybody knows why we're here. There were actually 4 different lawsuits brought against the city with respect to this project. We're here dealing with 2 of them that challenged the EIR and related approvals for the 8 Washington project. After trial in this case, the judge upheld almost all of the EIR, but did find in one respect that related to traffic that the EIR was deficient, and therefore has ordered that the court rescind the EIR and any approvals that relied on the EIR, which is what this motion is attempting to do. There's not a lot more to say. We do not yet have a new project proposal from the project sponsor. We anticipate one will come at some point, at which point the planning department will make a decision about the appropriate level of additional environmental review. But if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Doesn't look like there's any questions at this point. Thank you for your time. I'm going to ask Supervisor Christensen if there's any remarks that she'd like to make at this moment.
No, only that this cleans up the situation and clarifies our status with regards to the project going forward. We have a clean slate with regards to the EIR, and we're going to take everything else as it comes from this point going forward with a new set of reviews.
Thank you, Supervisor. Next up will be Ms. Sarah Jones from the Planning Department. She's also here to answer questions. No? Okay. All right, colleagues, seeing that there are no questions from you, let's go ahead and take public comment. All right, members of the public would like to speak on this item. On item number 2, please come up at this time at the podium. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. All right, seeing no public comment is closed. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can't be that fast.
My apologies, my apologies.
2 minutes. Okay, Sue Hester, I sent a letter this morning to the clerk, and I think it was sent to the city attorney. I stated all the motions that I thought were covered. I would like the affirmation or the denial of that letter and that list of motions and everything else. It was based on my list that I've kept because I was the attorney who took this through the entire administrative proceedings. Secondarily, I would like squarely the planning department to be asked, and the port, whether they have received any applications for a new project by Pacific Waterfront Partners or their successor body. Up until now, I've been told every time I've asked, there is no new application. If they have a new application, they should get it in fast, because that's the understanding of what the proceedings have been until this point. So, square question to the planning department, who is here, have they got any application for environmental review or for the project? Similarly for the port if they're here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, do you have a record? Have you received a record from the previous speaker?
Yes,
File?
and it
Okay.
was forwarded, yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. It looks like Mr. City Attorney?
Sure. Deputy
Or
City
Deputy
Attorney John
City
Givner.
Attorney.
Excuse me. Supervisor Christensen forwarded Ms. Hester's email to our office yesterday. The email lists a number of approval actions taken by the board, the port, and the Planning Commission. The motion that you have before you also lists all of the approval actions taken by the board, the port, the Planning Commission, and the Rec Park Commission. I believe Ms. Hester's list matches up with the list in the motion that is before you. That list is all the approval actions that we're aware of, and we're pretty confident it's a complete list. But if there are any other approval actions that any city department or commission or board has taken in reliance on the EIR that we have somehow missed, this motion will void those approval actions by operation of law. So if there's some little approval action that somehow didn't make the list, that skipped our view and Ms. Hester's view, that approval action would be void as well.
Thank you for that clarification. Please, sir.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Lee Radner, Friends of Golden Gateway, FOG, also a member of the Tenants Association and Barbary Coast Neighborhood Association. Have no problem per se with this housekeeping resolution. What concerned many of our members was the lack of dialogue prior to submitting this resolution, and with regards to the continuing of an 85-foot height level on the waterfront. I think we have spoken quite clearly that we want no walls on the waterfront, and we had hoped that we would be discussing with our supervisor some other means of reducing this height limit so it would be applicable to Seawall Lot 351, and also provide a project that would benefit not only our San Francisco community but the visitors alike. So we just wanted to go on record that we would hope that we would have more dialogue with these procedures in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on item 2? Okay. Seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. I just had one other question, and I believe this would be to the port, and it's just to clarify on Ms. Hester's question, other question on whether any applications have been submitted for the site or these sites.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Sarah Jones, Environmental Review Officer. I can't speak for the port, but as to the Planning Department, no application for a future project on this site has been submitted to us.
Great, thank you very much.
Supervisor Christensen.
I'll just wrap up my comments by saying Mr. Radner and I have been in contact. I think the lack of dialogue has been because not much is happening currently. I think everybody's been waiting for this and other steps to wind their way through. I know with the summer breaks and whatnot, a lot of the involved parties are not available at this time. This measure is not an attempt to a broader governance of the site. We certainly have recent propositions and other impacts on the height limits and the eventual determination of the use for the site. This will all come. I can assure my constituency that those discussions will follow. For the moment, this is a housekeeping step that brings city governance in alignment with the recent court decisions. We've done that. And as I said earlier, we can go forward from this point on further discussions of the use of the site. And I look forward to those conversations.
Thank you, Supervisor Christensen. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we forward the item with positive recommendation.
All right. Motion has been made and seconded. Without objection, looks like this motion passes. Thank you. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 3?
Item number 3 is a resolution endorsing a term sheet with the Regents of University of California for initial base rent of $180,000 per year.
All right, thank you very much. Colleagues, in 2013, the city convened a task force to explore the possibilities of constructing new, modernized UCSF research facilities at the San Francisco General Hospital. The buildings that these important research functions are currently located in are, as we know, seismically unsafe. Since 2013, UCSF, as well as our own Department of Public Health, have been working to negotiate a non-binding term sheet that sets forth the terms of the parties to begin negotiating on a ground lease for the development and then the operation of a new research facility at the General Hospital. San Francisco General Hospital serves a vital safety net for more than 100,000 patients a year and is the city's only level 1 trauma center. And now, having UCSF physicians and scientists in-house at the San Francisco General Hospital helps support the high-quality care and research that takes place at this facility. In order for this level of care and research to continue, we need to assist UCSF in upgrading the research facilities on the property. We have a few presenters with us on this particular item. We are first going to hear from John Updike, who is the Director of Real Estate, and he will present the details of the term sheet. We'll then hear from Mark from the Department of Public Health, and then we have an additional DPH staff and UCSF staff here to answer any detailed questions. Good to see you, Mr. Updike.
Good to see you, Chair Cohen. John Updike, Director of Real Estate. Good afternoon. So nearly 3 years ago, we began negotiations on the project through an exchange of letters in the fall of 2012. And it's a pleasure to now outline the key terms and conditions of this non-binding term sheet that's before you for consideration. First, some technical issues I need to mention, and that is that this document establishes the fundamental terms and economic parameters for a ground lease to be negotiated in good faith over the coming year. That said, the term sheet does not commit the city to approve a final ground lease, nor does it foreclose the possibility of consideration of alternatives to the proposal offered here, including not approving a final ground lease. The board will not take any discretionary action relative to the ground lease unless and until the Health Commission and the Board of Supervisors have reviewed and considered the environmental documentation prepared by the Regents in compliance with CEQA and adopted appropriate CEQA findings. So that said, both the city and the Regents commissioned appraisals of the B and C lot located on the campus. I have an overall picture of that.
Yes, thank you.
So you can see the B and C lot highlighted in red on this map. So those appraisals determined the fair market rental rate that should be charged under a ground lease to facilitate a lab building of approximately 175,000 square feet. The final negotiated ground lease rent rate in the term sheet considered the highest and best use of the property. It considered the recommendations of the appraisers and adjusted for exchange space rent of 85,000 square feet by the Regents on the SFGH campus, and for site conditions that we anticipate would create extraordinary construction costs, and only for those that we thought were extraordinary in nature. The term sheet calls for an annual base rent of $180,000 over an initial 75-year term. It also has a 24-year renewal option, which can be exercised in years 65 to 69 of the initial term. It has annual increases of 1.75% and market value resets at years 21, 46, and 61. And those recalculations of market value are capped at 5% per year on a non-cumulative basis. As the B and C lot construction is going to displace existing parking, the Regents agree to make a contribution to the city that's equivalent to the mutually agreed cost to replace the lost parking spaces, which will include consideration of expanding the 24th Street garage. The use of the lab facility will be for teaching, research, and public service consistent with the Regents and SFGH's respective missions. The project, give you a look at the massing of the project, is a 5-story building. Roughly 80 feet in height, not including the penthouse above, that will house approximately 800 employees. So the Health Commission approved the non-binding term sheet on their meeting of May 5th, and now that takes us to this day. I want to thank all of those involved from DPH, the SFMTA, the City Attorney's Office, and of course the entire team from UCSF. In this case, it truly did take a village to get us to this point. So Mark Primo is here to address any specific questions you might have, and also representatives from UCSF. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Supervisor Weiner, do you have a few questions?
That was before.
Thank you. Next presenter.
Madam Chair, Supervisors, I'll be brief. John basically covered all the important terms. I think the excitement around having that research center here builds on that 144-year history. And for some of you in the audience at home that may not know it, the research component staying on campus is critical to the designation of a level 1 trauma center. And I know Dr. Sue Carlisle's here and other of her staff that could expand on that and the relationship between the existing main hospital and the research center.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'd like to just open it up to see if there's any members from UCSF or the general that would like to speak at this time. I think I heard Dr. Carlisle's here. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to speak, you have an opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm very happy to speak in support of this project. As we have said for many years, we feel that having a viable research unit at SFGH allows us at the university to continue our 140-year partnership with the city in providing the highest clinical services that we possibly can for all of the people of San Francisco. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And on that note, let's go ahead and open up public comment. See if the public, see what they're thinking on item number 3. Any member of the public that'd like to speak on item 3, please come up. Just line up behind the podium.
Thank you. Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Elena Fuentes-Affleck, Chief of Pediatrics at San Francisco General and Professor of Pediatrics at UCSF. For 22 years as a faculty member, I have conducted research at San Francisco General Hospital on Latino and immigrant health. My research is focused on risk factors for adverse pregnancy outcomes in Latina women and the effect of acculturation on maternal and child health. I have recruited women and children at San Francisco General for my research studies. My research has demonstrated that maternal acculturation is associated with adverse outcomes and childhood obesity. San Francisco General is the only location in San Francisco where I could conduct my research, given the unique nature of the population we serve. The research infrastructure at San Francisco General has been fundamental to my success as a researcher, and the proposed research building will allow academic researchers to continue to address important and unanswered health issues. Thank you for your consideration of the proposed research building.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Neil Poe. I'm a professor at UCSF and chief of the medicine department at San Francisco General. We're the largest department at San Francisco General. And in addition to my administrative responsibilities there, I do research on health services delivery, population health, and health disparities. I came to SFGH 6 years ago because of the opportunity to work at a public hospital and combine discovery and research with my clinical care of patients. It's been a marvelous journey and experience to work in the vibrant scientific incubator we have at San Francisco General. The Department of Medicine at UCSF is the #1 department of medicine in the country that is funded by the NIH. And what many people don't know is that $60 million come to San Francisco General Hospital through the Department of Medicine from the National Institutes of Health every year. We do work on HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, diabetes, heart and kidney disease, health disparities, all diseases that affect vulnerable populations that we treat in the hospital. And innovating through research to address these to address diseases that cut lives short or cause disability is important for creating an environment that forward-thinking doctors like to work on. It's important that physicians have laboratories on site that keep them nearby their patients and committed to the mission of San Francisco General. And when the Mission Bay campus opened several years ago, some of my faculty had an opportunity to go there but didn't, and continued to work in outdated and unsafe facilities. They want to be available to their patients and hospital leadership. So our work at San Francisco General in research benefits the community in which we work, it benefits the city, and it's a beacon of innovation for underserved populations throughout the United States.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut you off. Professors, preachers seem to struggle with that 2-minute time. Professors, preachers, and I'll even add politicians. I don't know what it is, but 2 minutes is hard for them. The general public, they get it down. Are there any other members of the public that like to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Oh, you'd like to, okay. I'd like to open public comment back up, please. I'm sorry. Okay.
Hi, my name is Rachel Royce, and I'll make it short. So I just have a brief question as to whether this development will require 14B ordinance, local business enterprise participation.
Sure. I'd like you can direct your question to John Updike, or the two gentlemen behind you will be able to answer your question. Okay, thank you.
Happy to. Of course, the exact terms of the ground lease will be negotiated, and that full ground lease, which will get into these details, will come forward to the board in 1 year. But generally speaking, I can say yes, the intent is that that will apply to this contract.
Thank you very much. Okay, public comment is closed at this time. So, colleagues, you've heard the tremendous importance that San Francisco General Hospital provides our community in partnership with UCSF. So I'd like to make a motion that we move this item forward to the full board with a positive recommendation. Second.
Can I make a comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Supervisor Kim, please.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate support for what was just stated at public comment, that I do hope that what moves forward, I know that it is a public and private partnership, but we would like to see our minority-owned business and women-owned businesses be able to participate in this project. So I really look forward to a resolution on that issue, and I will be supporting the motion to move this forward with recommendation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, colleagues. I appreciate the support. It looks like we have unanimous support on this motion, so without objection, this motion moves forward with a positive recommendation. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 4?
Item number 4 is a resolution approving a deposit and reimbursement agreement for the Treasure Island Development Authority and Treasure Island Community Development LLC for initial deposit of $100,000.
Okay, thank you. The Mayor's Office is a sponsor of this item, and I believe that we've got Bob Beck from the Treasure Island Development Authority here to present. And Bob, why don't you come on up and make your presentation? Welcome. Mr. Beck, are you having some trouble?
Sorry?
Are you having trouble? Should I get an IT person?
I've got it up.
All right.
Thanks.
You ready to go?
Yep.
All right. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Bob Beck with the Treasure Island Development Authority. As you are no doubt aware, the entitlement and transaction documents for the development of Treasure Island were adopted in 2011. The development program calls for the development of 8,000 homes on Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island, 25% of which will be affordable, up to 500 hotel rooms, and about 500,000 square feet of commercial and retail and office space. It also includes a tremendous amount of public benefits, including more than 300 acres of open space, transit equipment for AC Transit and Muni, and as well as a transit operating subsidy for the ferry service that will come to and from Treasure Island, geotechnical improvements of Treasure Island, and sea level rise adaptations, as well as a range of community facilities, including a new police and fire station and other public infrastructure. The disposition and development agreement between TIDA and the developer, Treasure Island Community Development, commits the city to form requested community facilities districts and infrastructure financing districts to help pay for the public benefits that will be constructed on the island and to issue bonds against the future revenues from those districts. The agreement also calls for Treasure Island Community Development to advance funds to the city to cover our out-of-pocket expenses, including special tax consultants, bond counsel, informing the infrastructure financing and community facilities districts, and subject to reimbursement to the extent permissible by law from the proceeds of those districts. The infrastructure financing district is formed over a specific geographic area for a period of 40 years and can be used to pay directly or to finance debt for the construction of public facilities with an anticipated life of more than 15 years. And CFD has a little bit more flexibility. It's also formed over a specific geographic area. It is a supplemental tax on properties, whereas the IFD is a pledge of the San Francisco share of tax increment over the properties. The CFD is a supplemental tax. It can be used to finance facilities with a useful life of 5 years or more. It can also be used to finance ongoing maintenance operations. In our case, the CFD, in addition to the community facilities that it will finance, is expected to be the long-term revenue stream for maintaining the open spaces on the island. So just diagrammatically, the IFD is financed through the share of the San Francisco share of the 1% ad valorem tax on real estate, whereas the CFD represents an additional revenue commitment and tax commitment above the 1%, as indicated here in the blue. In anticipation of the first major phase of development beginning next year, TICD and TIDA now wish to move forward with the formation of the Community Facilities District and IFD over Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island, and enter into a deposit and reimbursement agreement, which is before you today, for the developer to advance an initial deposit of $100,000 towards the city's expenses in forming the districts. we'll, with this approval in hand, we would conclude a RFP process to select a special tax consultant and begin the process of drafting boundary maps and rate and method of apportionment for the district. Come back towards the end of this year, after validating the voting pool, to submit resolutions of intent to the board for approval to initiate the CFD and schedule public hearings. We'd move forward with those public hearings in the first half of 2016 with the expected target of validating the IFD and forming the CFD by the summer of 2016. With that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you. I see no questions from my colleagues. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Beck. I think that there was another presenter. No, there's no other. Okay. Well, let's take public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on item 4 or the presentation that they just heard? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed at this time. Supervisor Kim?
I'd like to move this forward with recommendation and just want to appreciate all the work that TIDA and Director Bob Beck has been doing.
Excellent work. Thank you very much. So there's been a motion made by Supervisor Kim. I'll second that motion. Looks like this motion will pass without objection. All right, this motion passes without objection, Madam Clerk. Thank you very much. Could you please call item number 5? 5.
Item number 5 is the urgency ordinance approving an interim prohibition on commercial mergers in the proposed Calle 24 special use district.
All right. Supervisor Campo is the author of this item, and he is joining us today. Supervisor Campos will make a brief presentation, and then followed by Supervisor Campos will be Ms. Diana Ponce de Leon from the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and she will be followed by Mr. Diego Sanchez from the Planning Department. Welcome to all. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to members of the Land Use Committee for hearing this item. I'd like to begin by handing out a revised version of the ordinance that has some of the amendments that we're making. And just to note that the amendments that I'm handing out, and then I would ask that the committee make those amendments and incorporate those amendments into the ordinance, basically amend language specifically dealing with the purpose of this legislation. We actually received feedback from a number of folks specifically about this language, and so we've incorporated that feedback, and that is the nature of the amendments that are included in that document. In May of 2014, this Board of Supervisors unanimously passed a resolution that established the Calle 24 Latino Cultural District for an area of the Mission surrounding 24th Street. The purpose of the establishment of this Latino Cultural District was to recognize this area as the center for Latino culture and commerce, and to enhance the unique nature of Calle 24, 24th Street as a special place for San Francisco residents and tourists. In this sense, the Latino Cultural District is similar to other cultural districts in the city, whether it's Chinatown, Japantown, North Beach. And there are many reasons why this district was created, but let me just mention some of the reasons. One, to strengthen, preserve, and enhance Latino arts and cultural institutions, enterprises, and activities. Two, to encourage civil engagement and advocate for social justice. 3, to encourage economic vitality and economic justice for district families, for working people, for immigrants. 4, to promote economic sustainability for neighborhood businesses and nonprofits. 5, to promote education about Latino culture. 6, to ensure collaboration and coordination with other local arts, community, social service agencies, schools, and businesses. To achieve the purposes of this Latino Cultural District, my office has been working closely with the Mayor's Office, with our residents, our businesses, our artists, and other community stakeholders who have engaged in a process for the purpose of creating a special use district for this cultural district. As this process for the creation of a special use district is underway, we have many long-term neighborhood-serving businesses in this cultural district that have closed or been forced out of the neighborhood due to skyrocketing rents, as well as the lack of commercial rent control in the state of California. Because of this phenomenon, the mayor's office and my office decided to seek interim controls for the purpose of prohibiting the merger of commercial storefronts where the merger would result in a ground floor commercial use space of greater than 799 gross square feet. These interim controls that are before you make sense for a number of reasons. Chief among these reasons is that smaller business spaces are more affordable and accessible to many businesses, something hugely important in today's market where commercial rents are simply exploding. I will shortly turn over the presentation to Diana Ponce de Leon from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, as well as Diego Sanchez from the Planning Department to provide data about the character of the Latino Cultural District. But I want to simply say the following, that the interim controls that are before us are a pretty modest and measured set of interim controls that we believe are needed as we move forward with the larger process for the creation of a special use district. I know that there are a number of individuals who perhaps may have concerns about some of the specifics of the interim controls. My hope is that as we move forward with the special use district, that the perspectives of all the individuals involved are taken into account. I know that we have a number of members of the community here who will be speaking in favor of this item. I also want to thank the number of stakeholders that have met with my office, and I especially want to identify the Golden Gate Restaurants Association, which has met with my office to discuss the specifics of the interim controls, and as I understand it, will be speaking in favor of the interim controls shortly. Lastly, I want to thank Mayor Lee and his staff, his planning department staff, the Mayor's Office of Workforce and Economic Development for all the work that has gone into this, as well as in my office. I want to thank Hillary Ronan for her work. So with that, I will turn it over to Diana Ponce de Leon and Diego Sanchez. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Diana Ponce de Leon, and I'm here on behalf of the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development. Before we get into the interim controls, the purpose of my presentation is to provide some context in regards to the process that we've been undergoing for the past 2 years and our involvement through Invested Neighborhoods in Calle 24 or the Lower 24th Street commercial corridor. This interim control is one temporary intervention in a larger comprehensive process to help ensure the neighborhood serving businesses and institutions are strengthened within such a culturally rich, diverse, and important part of our city. Data and information will continue to be assessed in a process to develop controls for the proposed special use district, and under this time it is intended to allow us to assess the data, continue to meet with the community to develop a longer-term special use district. So Calle 24 is part of Mayor Edley's Invested Neighborhoods initiative. It's one of 25 corridors around the city where the vision for this initiative is that our commercial districts will be economically thriving, safe, resilient, sustainable, and meet the needs of local residents. There are a few components to our program that we look at and assess, but most proud of, I'm going to say that we're proud of working very closely with the community and developing what those interventions are. Each commercial district is very distinct. It's very different, and so is every intervention that we come up with. But we look at a variety of different things, but we make sure that our principles are that existing businesses will thrive, that there's a high quality of life, strong community capacity, and attractive physical conditions. Those are all the things that we strive for in a very healthy commercial district. The Calle 24 Latino Cultural District, the Invested Neighborhoods boundary initially began along 24th Street from Mission Street to Potrero Avenue. Since then, it has expanded, but I will say most of the data that we have collected in detail is along those boundaries within that corridor, which is another reason why we're asking for this time in order to be able to explore further commercial properties within this corridor. The makeup of 24th Street is a variety of retail, restaurants, etc. To highlight some of those, we have a total of 164 storefronts. Once again, the boundary there is from Mission Street to Potrero. We have a vacancy rate, if you look at the gray on the graph, of 9%, but only 4% of those vacancies are actually advertised for lease. The rest are in transition, they may be under construction, etc. The highest percentage of storefronts is in the eating and drinking category, including the bars. If you turn to where the pink and the red is, that's 31% of the corridor makeup. Retail, excluding markets and convenience stores, in the blue is 21%, which is the next greatest. And in the orange, it's 20% of retail serving, of professional services, which may include things such as beauty salons, legal services, etc., and for the corridor. So for each neighborhood, when we go into the neighborhood, we assess the needs and we talk to the community. We have an assigned point person. In this case, it's myself. Over the past 2 years, I've spoken to residents, nonprofits, businesses, walked the street. These are some of the summary of concerns that we've collected over time and that we based our strategies of response to. So some of in terms of strengthening the sustainability of businesses, some of the concerns raised included access to small business programs and services in Spanish. That was a huge thing. While we had in the past services, one of the priorities of the corridor and of residents were that to make sure that language accessibility was there appropriately. Retaining the businesses, there were many, the concern was that there's leases that are expiring. Some of them are short-term. Many of those businesses have been in business for many years and survived on month-to-month leases, putting them at risk for being displaced. Increasing rents, sales of property, 88 lawsuits, that's something that we have been dealing with in the Mission District. And the changing market and being competitive and be able to compete with that. In terms of strengthening sustainability of cultural institutions, that was also a priority. Obviously, it makes up a huge part of the corridor in the Latino Cultural District. So again, it was some of the same things, expiring and short-term leases, strengthening those, and funding, access to funding and programs for those institutions. So as a response, we've developed certain strategies and programs and made them accessible. We focused on providing technical assistance to businesses comprehensively. So we have free consultations with business experts. We have lease negotiation services. And we will also be conducting an economic study to guide some of our development strategies moving forward. We also have funding this fiscal year for a commercial corridor manager. In terms of strengthening and celebrating our cultural assets, of course, we work together with the supervisor in creating the Latino Cultural District. We've supported arts and cultural institutions by extending the same programs that we do for small businesses. We've also, in the creation of the Latino Cultural District, we felt it was really important to go out to the community and get a sense of what the residents, neighbors, et cetera, what they felt should be a Latino Cultural District, what some of the strengths, opportunity, and weaknesses were in establishing this. And we also have some funding for mural and banner restoration. In terms of the Latino Cultural District Plan, that was a 6-month engagement process. But again, we've been engaging with the community way beyond that. Now, that process itself included community meetings, focus groups, stakeholder interviews, and a survey. Some of the results were, it led to the mission, vision, and goals, a Latino Cultural District Committee, and it identified some priorities and projects and activities. Now we're moving into the strategy phase after that report, which is, once again, why we're asking for this prohibition on storefront mergers that we think will support the district and their intent. So the interim prohibition on commercial storefront mergers, as you see, this is the existing boundary where it's proposed. It excludes Mission Street, but it includes 22nd, Potrero, Cesar Chavez, and stems out all the way to Bartlett. So this is the boundary that we're speaking of. It is to address concerns around increasingly unaffordable rents and loss of businesses along the corridor. It's intended to assist in retaining the character of the corridor in terms of small storefront spaces and the diversity that exists within those storefront spaces, and provide it along those blocks. It's to allow us time to develop further, more long-term strategies. And we are estimating that within that boundary, there are more than 40 storefronts that could potentially be merged. And so this is an example of one building that has a variety of different businesses in it and located in the smaller storefronts. And here we have, just one example, and how it's to make the point of how it contributes to the character of 24th Street and what we see when we walk along in these tiny storefronts. So in this block, one building, we have an art gallery, a clothing store, a skateboard shop, and another clothing and retail, where actually people come and they sell their own clothes and sell it there out of that shop. Here we have a bookstore and clothing. These two are some of the smaller storefronts located within the corridor. And here's another example. This one is across from Mission Street on the other side towards Bartlett. And this one is actually, I provide an example on 22nd Street and how also small storefronts exist over on that corridor. And that's it for my presentation. I'll leave it up to Diego from Planning Department.
This mic, this one. Diego Sanchez with Planning Department staff. Supervisors, currently the merging of first-story commercial use space into a space less than 2,500 gross square feet may be approved over the counter at the Planning Department. An applicant would only need a building permit application with floor plans and elevations. A pre-application community meeting or a neighborhood notification process would not be necessary in this. And oftentimes an extensive design review would not be conducted under the current situation. As you've seen with some of the context provided, as well as other preliminary walking surveys of the SUD, as well as the multi-month outreach to community stakeholders, it seems to be clear that this area is home to a large number of buildings that feature multiple smaller storefronts. This appears to be a defining characteristic of the area, one that affords business ownership and employment opportunities to neighborhood residents. The interim control on the merger of first-story commercial spaces is beneficial for a number of reasons. As been mentioned before, it provides time to survey the SUD to greater depth, including 24th Street, with respect to character-defining features at the street level, and also allows time to formulate possible, nuanced, fine-tuned street-level commercial space controls if necessary. The planning department is not aware of any known pipeline projects seeking to merge a first-story commercial space that would be adversely affected by these interim controls. These interim controls are found to be in compliance with many of the planning code priority policies, especially those that seek to preserve existing neighborhood character, those that seek to preserve existing neighborhood retail services, and those that seek to create opportunities for resident ownership and smaller businesses. These interim controls are also in compliance with a number of general plan policy objectives found in the commerce and industry element, as well as in the mission area plan. A lot of these goals seek to retain and provide neighborhoods serving goods and services. They seek to recognize and encourage diversity among the neighborhood commercial districts. They seek to promote high-quality urban design on commercial streets. And they also seek to ensure that the Mission Neighborhood's commercial districts, including 24th Street, continues to serve the needs of residents, including immigrants and low-income households. So those are the reasons why the Planning Department finds these interim controls to be beneficial for the area. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if this is a question for the Mayor's Office or Planning, or maybe for both. Thank you for the presentations. And I'll start by saying that I agree that these merger permits should not be over the counter. I was surprised to hear that they were, and I don't think that they should be. And there should be a heightened, at a minimum, heightened level of scrutiny. And so right now it's a little bit like the Wild West, where anyone can go in and merge anything they want. I understand that 2,500 square feet does currently trigger a CU, but as long as you're under the 2,500 square feet, you go in over the counter, no notification to anyone. I guess arguably maybe someone could appeal to the Board of Permit Appeals, but that would be it. So I agree that should stop. I guess my question is, and I've raised this, I had a conversation last week and again this morning with Mr. Arguello from CAI 24, and we had a frank discussion about this. My question is, why a prohibition and not a conditional use? And I understand that there will ultimately, the plan is to have an SUD, which could include a CU. But the question is for these controls, which could end up being around for a while, until that SUD gets put in place, that things don't happen overnight when you're creating new zoning, why not do a conditional use? And because it seems like we're going from one extreme to the other extreme instead of trying something that I think can be pretty effective. And I'll say that, for example, when in the Castro and Noe Valley, for a long time, there was effectively a ban on new restaurants. There was a strict cap placed on the number of restaurants in Noe Valley and the Castro because there was a perception that there were too many restaurants proliferating, and it effectively became a ban on new restaurants beyond converting existing restaurants. And after a number of years, prohibitions often have unintended consequences because there might be projects that you want to prohibit, but other projects that people might want, and without a conditional use and having a prohibition instead, there's no flexibility. Even if everyone agrees, you have to go through an entire new legislative process to allow it. And so Supervisor Bevan Dufty, right towards the end of his term, did legislation to convert that hard cap to a conditional use. When on Valencia Street, we were seeing a proliferation of conversions of retail spaces to restaurants, and the merchants had a very legitimate concern that daytime foot traffic would collapse in the neighborhood as more and more nighttime restaurants were being created out of previously existing retail space. Actually, Supervisor Campos and I worked together on legislation that we sponsored and the board passed to say that you need a conditional use to convert retail to restaurant. It was not a ban. To my knowledge, no such CU applications have been submitted. I might be wrong about that, but I'm at least unaware of any. And I suspect that if that's the case, it's because people know that there would be a lot of community pushback and that CU would not be granted. We have seen plenty of situations where conditional uses have been defeated, and so conditional uses it's not a rubber stamp. You have to do a pre-application community meeting, submit your application, it goes through a process, it has to go to the Planning Commission, the Planning Commission has to approve it, and then whether it's approved or denied, it's then appealable to the Board of Supervisors. We have seen plenty of situations where conditional uses have been defeated at the Planning Commission or have been defeated on appeal to the Board of Supervisors. And so the conditional use is a flexible process where you are able to achieve what you're trying to achieve while understanding that you can't predict every situation. And you can have a situation, as I mentioned, where everyone thinks this is a good idea, but then you can't do it. And so that is the concern that I have, and I'd be curious just to know the mayor's perspective or planning or both about why not do a conditional use and why instead do a complete prohibition.
Diego Sanchez with Planning Department staff. I think the interim controls allow time to recalibrate the appropriate conditional use controls if that's going to be sought by the community. Right now, you have a number of different use size restrictions. Perhaps in this time, there's more outreach to the merchants, and we can calibrate this from 800 to 2,500 to 1,200. We don't know what that's going to be. There's also additional conditional use criteria that need to be formulated. I think this interim period would give time to formulate those additional criteria with the community and other stakeholders. And I think that's the perspective from the Planning Department as to why an interim prohibition in this time would be okay. It is not a permanent control. It is for a short period of time.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially, it could become a permanent control. And once you have a temporary control, sometimes it can create its own momentum to make it permanent. And I understand that the future SUD could include a CU that's tailored to 24th Street, saying here are the 5 or 7 or 10 criteria. But the current general CU requires that the use be, I believe the term is necessary and convenient. And so it's a term that amply, I think, encompasses the concerns and frequently legitimate concerns we've heard about some of these mergers and what it means for the neighborhood and the character of the neighborhood, because I don't dispute any of those concerns. My question is about why a CU, and I respect what you just articulated. I'm not convinced by it.
I think a lot of folks in the community, and I can turn it over to other colleagues here, at this point believe that the existing conditional use criteria may not be sufficiently sensitive to the particularities that are happening right now on 24th Street, given the socio and economic changes, is what I understand, but I definitely allow my colleagues to also chime in and add to this.
Diana Ponce de Leon, Office of Economic and Workforce Development. Why we sought a prohibition as opposed to a CU is because we will be exploring a CU more comprehensively that may include other things beyond storefront mergers. So when looking at it, that's not the only piece, and we need more time in order to explore more comprehensively other interventions in that CU. In addition, I think it allows for a pause for the community to be able to focus and engage with us on thinking on different potentially what a CU could have, what restrictions it should have, as opposed to if there is a storefront merger that is proposed, then they have to organize around it. And there's been many things that they feel pressured, the community that we've heard, and also the merchants. Many of their leases are month to month and are not being renewed. And so they feel like that is an additional threat where property owners may be looking to merge. And so then it allows for a pause for us to engage in a discussion with the community without feeling that additional pressure that they may be losing storefronts. And it is a temporary, at this point, prohibition. So.
Okay. I appreciate that. I'm not, I think there's another side to it, but I do appreciate that explanation.
Supervisor Campos.
Thank you. I don't know if Supervisor Kim wants to say anything, but I wanted to respond to that. Let me say that it may very well be that as part of a special use district, a conditional use is the appropriate tool. But the point here is that this is a community that doesn't want to spend the next few weeks fighting about a specific conditional use, and instead use that time to actually study long-term what it should look like. The notion that this is going to be a permanent or could be a permanent control, respectfully, that is not the reality. To the contrary, we actually are going through the process of a special use district. Yes, I work with Supervisor Wiener on the Valencia corridor. At that point, the avenue that we chose was one that was consistent with where the community was. In this case, the community believes that to fully consider a conditional use down the road, that we need to have this interim control so that the community's efforts go to actually studying the issue as opposed to fighting a specific project. The other thing that I would say is that, for purposes of these small businesses, it really is about preserving small commercial space. And that's very critical because commercial space, when it's smaller, it is more affordable. And in this market, this hot real estate market, the last thing we want is to engage in a process to create a special use district as the community is terrified that a specific storefront is going to be lost. We don't want to do that. We don't want to have to worry about that. And so this is simply about giving the opportunity to the community to actually engage in an open discussion and in a full study without having to worry about that. So that's why we approached it this way. And, as the planning department noted, the issue of the CU was discussed for purposes of the interim controls, but we felt that actually to give that concept, due consideration, that we couldn't really engage in two processes where you actually engage in a discussion about the, conditions for a conditional use in an interim control process, and then on top of that, the SUD. We want to focus on the SUD so that we can get this done as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I just wanted to add some of my brief comments as well. First of all, I just want to say that I do support this interim prohibition on commercial mergers in the special use district. And I think I'll just add a couple of comments. I think that while there are many neighborhoods in this city that are experiencing a lot of change, there are very few micro neighborhoods that I believe are seeing the changes that this neighborhood is. I spent a year on 24th Street corridor when I ran a performance arts venue space, and for a year we were not in our original space, and so we actually co-shared with Galleria de la Raza. And so I was there almost every week, and I think it has been stunning, the changes that I've seen just on that corridor over the last 10 years. It is a corridor that has always supported really small businesses that were clearly family-owned, individually owned. And I think that it's important that we continue to support the original characteristics of this neighborhood, and also to really examine a plan for the future economic development of this neighborhood. So how do we protect these types of jobs in the neighborhood? How do we protect these types of ownership opportunities? And a lot of ways that we can do this by ensuring that we have small floor plates that emerging business owners can actually move into. Larger floor plates are a lot easier for chains and also those with a lot more capital. 24th Street, I think, has always been an opportunity street for many of our residents and small families to really begin sustaining themselves economically and also contributing to the vitality of the neighborhood. So this interim prohibition, I think, really goes into looking at the health and welfare of this community as required to by the state, and is really looking at how in the long term can we preserve some of the, I hope not historical, purpose of this neighborhood, which is really for our residents in that neighborhood. So I do look forward to seeing this forward. It is an interim prohibition, and as we said, we will be doing a long-term study in terms of what we'd like to see. But I just think, given how rapidly this neighborhood is changing, I do think a prohibition of 45 days is appropriate.
Supervisor Campos.
Madam Chair, just a quick note. The ask would be that you amend this along the lines that was described before, and that once public comment takes place, I would respectfully ask that you move forward this item to the board to be heard on the 28th of July. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. Yes, that is definitely understood. I have a couple questions just for the planning department. Mr. Sanchez, just, I guess, really very clearly and succinctly, is the department in favor of this legislation and this proposal?
Yes.
You are supportive of it?
Yes.
And can you tell me in a very simple sentence why you guys are supporting this?
Preserving these smaller spaces seems to be preserving the existing character of 24th Street and something that makes the 24th Street corridor very unique and stand out among the other neighborhood commercial districts.
Thank you. And have you had a chance to review some of the folks that are interested in the opponents that want a conditional use requirement for these mergers? Have you had a chance to talk to them and understand their perspective?
I personally have not had a chance to speak with them. I know the supervisor's office has been in discussion multiple times with the groups.
Okay. All right. Thank you. There's a couple things that, thank you, Mr. Sanchez. I want to speak to Supervisor Campos real quick. I'm really interested in what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and I understand the purpose that which you're using every tool that you have available to do. One of the things that I've been able to do in the Bayview community is we started a Bayview CAC, a Citizens Advisory Committee, and we started that because of the redevelopment agency, the disillusionment, and it allowed Bayview residents to have a voice in the overall planning process of the Bayview community. Now, the Planning Commission, so that would require every single planner or project sponsor to come to the Bayview community, and before they can go before the Planning Commission, the Bayview CAC has to sign off on this. And I am only using this as an example that that's something that you might be interested in developing in the mission as you begin to navigate this transition to ensure that there are neighborhood voices at the table that is affecting and shaping the planning department's decisions and as they continue to move forward. I only offer that as a suggestion. It's a tool that we've been using for about a year now. We're still working out the kinks, but it has really empowered neighbors that have been very nervous about all of the change and the development that's been happening in the Bayview community, everything from the shipyard to possible rezoning. They're dealing with this issue. So something for you to consider. Okay, at this point, I think it's time for us to take public comment. To the mayor's staff, thank you for being here. I'd like to open up public comment at this time. If anyone is interested, remember you have 2 minutes. Please line up on this side of the chamber and come on up. I don't have any speaker cards in this moment in front of me for item number 5. Madam Clerk, are there speaker cards? That's it? Oh, yeah, you're right. This is item 2. Okay, excellent. You all look good. Please. Welcome.
Supervisors, my name is Luis Granados. I'm with the Mission Economic Development Agency. I want to thank you for considering the support of this measure. It's something that we really, really need. It's something that that we support. And I think the point about a conditional use is, I think, is actually a really important point. And I think that the flexibility that a conditional use provides, I think, would be great under normal circumstances. Right now, however, we have lost 8,000 people from the neighborhood in 10 years. We've lost hundreds of local service businesses during the time frame, during the same time frame. Right now, flexibility is not the highest priority. The whole idea of highest and best use is not what's ruling here. I think what we need is to have, we have to control, we have to protect that neighborhood, we have to protect that community. And this is the kind of measure that community supports, that your staff supports. It's just common sense. So I would just ask you to not turn a deaf ear to what you're hearing from community, and to please support this measure. You know, if you heard on June 8th with 800 people, this is part of that movement. You know, there's a ballot initiative that just qualified. This is part of that movement. This is a very rational, good approach to protect the small businesses in that neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Can I do that? Good afternoon. My name's Denise Diana, and I support the Cal 24 Special Use District. I have a hard time figuring out how any of us living in San Francisco are going to find the services we need if we are going to have wall-to-wall restaurants, which seems to be the current, what's happening currently. Small businesses are an economic stimulator by providing jobs locally. These businesses spend most of their revenue within the community while giving cohesion to the community for which they provide services. Mission businesses are being forced out to provide for more restaurants. There are just so many restaurants that can be supported in a community. The lifespan of most restaurants are from 1 to 2 years. We need community-serving businesses such as shoe repair, laundry, small meat and fish markets, small vegetable and fruit stores, restaurants. Restaurants have limited use to a community, and taking community services out of business will leave behind a sterile community, no color, no diversity, no joy, no caring people. We will be a community of zombies, distracted by their handheld devices, cell phones and headphones. Like the three monkeys, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, while I beg for attention to get directions. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alan Martinez. I speak for myself. I'm going to read from the Mission Area Plan, which is city policy adopted by the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. Objective 7.3, reinforce the importance of the mission as the center of Latino life in San Francisco. Policy 7.3.1, support efforts to preserve and enhance social and cultural institutions. And 3.3.3, protect and support Latino and other culturally significant local businesses, structures, properties, and institutions in the mission. This is adopted city policy, but without concrete steps, without concrete land use policies to implement this, this is just nice words. The city has a responsibility to take concrete steps to make this happen. And I want to remind people that Calle 24 is significantly different than a lot of other neighborhood commercial districts because it's adjacent to the Mission Commercial District, which does support larger floor plates for businesses. If you're looking for a larger floor plate in the Mission, there are other major streets available. The intent of Calle 24 is to support local neighborhood businesses. So it is a significantly different than some of the other neighborhood commercial districts. On 24th Street, there is no major commercial street around Upper 24th Street. So I want you to keep that in mind, that this is a unique situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Gabriel Medina. I'm the policy manager for Mission Economic Development Agency. As my executive director, Luis Coronado, stated, this is a very measured approach, And we really appreciate and support Calle 24's leadership in taking this on. And as actually Alan just mentioned, Mission Street is a juxtaposition of what happens to a commercial corridor when you don't have these type of protections. So it has a larger footprint for businesses, and if you read the data from the Mission Public Life Plan, you'll see that we've had a 40-unit loss of retail space and a 40-unit increase of luxury restaurants. And in addition to that, we've lost child care spaces, and we've also had a huge increase in sometimes often without conditional use or without approved conditional use office space. So this is actually a very measured approach. I think one of the things that makes San Francisco a vibrant and viable city for tourists and for locals especially alike is that we have these unique neighborhoods with character, and that encourages shopping. It gives a sense of place. It's something that, you know, not only people grew up in and become inculcated with the culture, but it's something they choose to return back and visit again. And so that's why I'm asking that please, you know, support this interim control. It's a very measured response. You know, thank you, Supervisor Campos, for all your work on this over the years, and thanks to the Planning Department as well for their long-time approach with this. MEDA, you know, we graduate about, you know, somewhere between 30 to 50 new businesses a year, and the only way they can ever find a home is to have a small commercial storefront that's viable. And often for the Latino community, starting their own business is the only means they have of having a means of income and alternative means of employment. So that's why these commercial corridors and these small spaces are really important. So please support this interim control. Thank you.
My name is Buck Baggett. I'm a member of the Mission Bernal chapter of San Francisco ACE. This is a great idea. Please support it. You should be doing anything you can to preserve the diversity of our neighborhoods and prevent the displacement of residents and small businesses. I do want to note that some people on the board, if they can't stop these efforts, do anything they can to water them down. In this San Francisco brand of neo-Reaganism that worships the market as a solution to all of our problems. And Supervisor Wehner, you're the chair of that wing, and may you go no further in your political career. Your
Mr. Buggett, remember,
efforts to
can't make your
stop
remarks
us
personal.
from controlling our own neighborhoods is astounding.
Next speaker.
Hello, Supervisors. My name's Lou Demates, and I'm speaking for myself. And I'm an artist. I've lived in the Mission for over 30 years. I'm a photographer and a filmmaker. And recently, in the last couple of years, I worked with other members in the community to restore the historic Carnival mural on the corner of 24th and South Van Ness, and got support from the Lower 24th Merchants Association, Calle 24, and many, many businesses and NGOs in the neighborhood in order to get the funding from the city. It was a community challenge grant from the city of San Francisco. The murals of San Francisco I think you all know, but I'll say it anyway. They're known. People from other neighborhoods go to see the murals. People from all over the city, all over the Bay Area, all over the state, all over the country, and all over the world come to our neighborhood to see the murals. And you can go on Balmy Alley almost any day, and there'll be people that are giving tours in very many different foreign languages. If you're going to have murals, you need muralists. You need artists. And I'm an artist, and I have seen so many artists being forced out of the neighborhood. And I'm talking about internationally famous artists like Mike Rios, who did many of the murals in the Mission, and I'm talking about artists that are just getting started. So we need our art spaces. One of the spaces artists use are small storefronts. Deanna showed that there's an art gallery on one of the streets. We need the art galleries. We need the artists. And us artists need help so that we can stay in the neighborhood, produce the art that goes out around the world. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors, and also thank the people who have brought this to your attention, Calle 24, Eric Arguello, and committee. The Mission has always been a barrio for everyone. It has been friendly to families. It has been a community that has been associated with toughness from the Valencia Gardens to the Army Street projects, all along 24th Street and up and down different streets of the Mission. It has been a place of dreams and sometimes nightmares for local businesses. It has been a place where families can thrive, send their kids to college and whatnot. Families like the Dominguez Hurtado family of the Dominguez Bakery, families like the Sanchez family, Casa Sanchez, families of generations of La Palma, Taqueria, Torteria, families like Discolandia, the families of La Victoria. These families and many more families have prospered in the Mission, have given their kids a future by being able to sustain a business. Also continues today, the Guerra family at Sunrise, Hollywood Hairstyle, Graciela's Hair, Jeje Tucuy, who was also in danger of losing his business, Mishkowat's Arts and Crafts on South Van Ness and 24th Street, and our family, La Reina Bakery on 24th between Folsom and Shotwell, next to Phil's, Sidewalk Juice, Adobe Books, the Pizza Place, Press. There's a lot of new businesses on that street, and they're all prospering. And I like to say that we'd like to see that as business, more prosperity. But again, we know that the future of our prosperity depends on the local people who live in that community, and that has been falling by the wayside to profit. And so, again, we want to say that the Latino community is growing in numbers. They're now the majority in California, and they have surpassed the Anglo population, and business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Supervisors, thank you, especially Supervisor Campos. My name is Lorraine Garcia Nakata. I'm a former San Francisco Arts Commissioner, also Federal Commissioner for the National Museum of the American Latino, currently advisor to the Hispanic, into the Latino Historical Society. I am here probably going to focus in on some of the issues around conditional question. I used to give out funds for the whole state of California, oversaw huge projects here for public art in San Francisco, and also gave out funds in the Bay Area. One of the most important things that you do is actually establish guidelines and criteria for the basis of challenging decisions that have to be made. So if I based all my decisions and recommendations on conditional thread, it would be very difficult to be able to make informed decisions. So while I completely honor and respect your question, to be able to make even decent conditional decisions, you have to have informed and well-grounded criteria and guidelines. And for that to happen, you have to gather the data, and you have to have all of that be informed in advance. So I really thank all of you for considering this piece that actually gives us time, and that time is very important. So I, at this point, also would like to just mention that I have heard the word that people want to open up, the mission, and for me, that's code for being able to just sort of continue some of the very thinly planned ventures that have happened to date. But thank you so much for considering this.
Good afternoon. My name is Anastasia Powers-Quare. I'm the Executive Director of Bravo Theater Center and Bravo for Women in the Arts. I have been living in San Francisco for 33 years. I lived in the Mission for 15 years, and I've been a resident of Bayview for the past 16 years. I'm here to talk to you about social justice, because that is what is really important to me. I have, in the last 3 years, took an organization that was in foreclosure, and I've raised over $3 million. $2.5 million of that was from grants. I wrote all those grants based on the services that I would provide to the community, the services to families, to children, to queers, to people of color, to all of the unheard voices that struggle in our cities. And that's really, and so all my grant reports are how many people did you serve, and who were they, and where did they live, and where do they come from? And a lot of the grants I got from San Francisco City, the city of San Francisco. So you're very interested in that data and you want to know what that data is. Well, that's getting really hard to achieve those goals because there's no more children, there's no more people of color, and it's getting really hard for artists to live here. So what do we want our city to look like? What do we want our city to be? And on 24th Street, Calle 24, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take a moment to stop and figure out what we want our neighborhood to look like, how we want to move forward, and how can we be a mixed neighborhood. We don't have to be a poor neighborhood. We don't have to be a completely rich neighborhood, but we can be an integrated neighborhood with all kinds of people, with all kinds of services, with all kinds of community. So I ask you to support this ordinance and
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you to everyone for putting your hearts and mind into the challenges and opportunities of our city. My name is Pam Del Rio. I lived on Harrison between 24th and 25th since June of 2000. I was able to buy my house at a time of overbidding, limited rentals, and very high rents. And here we are again. In 2000, when I bought, Garfield Park was a place of daily drug selling, and now it is soccer leagues and kids. Bernal dwellings were being rebuilt. Balmy Alley was a favorite drug-doing and pooping place, and now a popular tourist attraction. 24th was dark with many rundown storefronts and lacking diverse offerings from food to services. Today, there are 19 inactive storefronts on 24th Street between Mission and Potrero. Phil's Coffee was a rundown corner store when I moved there in 2000. There have probably been 20 to 30 shootings on 24th and adjacent blocks. There have been 2 murders yards from my front door on Harrison. 24th is emerging as a diverse retail strip serving the community as well as attracting those outside the neighborhood. 5 years ago, you could not get matzo ball soup, a burger, or a slice of pizza, a skateboard or skate clothes, acupuncture or a cell phone, a funky donut, a funky ice cream, or funky vintage clothes. You couldn't get a book, and now we have 3 bookstores. We have a healthy and organic groceries. That is one storefront that would like to merge with the next one to be a bigger, organic, healthy grocery store. We have French-inspired California food, and we have sushi. New businesses have taken over long, vacant storefronts or neglected storefronts. There's a lot of concern about high-priced restaurants invading the street. Our city is known for its culinary, innovation, and leadership. It's rumored that a church was offered $100,000 to evict tenants. I'm not sure the street has gotten to that point. New businesses have a vested interest in maintaining the space, lighting, cleaning, activity, as well as being part of a community. They bring care and enthusiasm to the street and are motivated to keep their businesses vital and viable. I am not for the proposed legislation. I don't think it solves the problem.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Annalisa Escobedo. I am part of the Calle 24 Council. I represent the youth. I was asked to read a letter from one of our community members. Hopefully I can read it fast enough. One significant reason I feel welcome in my community is the work of Calle 24. I am a 28-year-old white guy with a degree from a top college working on a software startup. I am gentrification, and yet I moved here and reached out to the people who lived in the Mission for many years in hopes of being part of the community. I was welcomed with warm embrace of arms, and I was greeted with the stories of friends who lived through SF and the Mission in the past 3 to 4, 5, 6 decades. The perspective of how SF came to be what it is today, the experience with the neighborhood's art, music, and food, and invitation to contribute to all of that, much of that has happened on 24th Street. And through the felicitation of work of Eric Arguello, by working with Calle 24, I've been able to host conversations with new and old residents, engage SF, representing tech, nonprofits, housing, and the arts, etc. In the cultural epicenter that drew me in the neighborhood in the first place, I've witnessed Calle 24's work with organizations like Priscilla Eyes to restore murals that gave the Mission its distinct aesthetic and native character. I benefited from the safety initiatives, cleanup projects, merchants organizations, and promotions. I bristle when thinking about my community will look like where it's not for the work of groups like Calle 24 in the years since and of course prior to when I've moved here. I am grateful that...
Thank you. Thank you. Please, next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Sharples. I first moved to the mission in 1987. Pardon me.
You can pull the mic up closer.
Yeah, thanks.
There it is.
I first moved to the mission in 1987. I worked at Café La Bohème. That was my first job while I was in college. And I have been a part of the community all of these 30 years, nearly. I worry that if we have a legislation like this, that places like Galeria de la Raza and MEPI across the street from my house would not be able to expand if they needed to. Let's say it was a place like that, a place that's cherished in the neighborhood. With this legislation, we cannot make any change to that. If we have conditional use, we can all talk about it. And I think we should all in our community be together. We should discuss these things. I think that all of this should be up for debate. I think this is a healthy place for that. And I think that we should all as a community come together, look at how this should go, and not just have one organization describe how all the rules and all the planning should happen in the neighborhood that has many different ethnicities, many different types of people, and always have. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Carlos Olórzano. I am the CEO for the Hispanic Chambers of Commerce of San Francisco. We represent over 300 small business members. 80% of them over the last 10 years were located in the Mission area. Now, 75% of them are not there anymore, including myself. I used to have an office there. I cannot afford it anymore. And with changes in the housing and the problems in the housing, we're still having those problems. We need to support small businesses. We need to support mom and pop's businesses. We have been working with the city to try to make as many small businesses as an LBEs, local business enterprise. They cannot become that because they do not have a physical office in the city. They would like to, but they can't. We're having this, the relevance that it has in the small Latino businesses in the area is very important. Other areas are able to keep their cultural identities. We need to do the same. We need to have the time to consider to work like the Bayview had done it, to work in the Mission area with a small business, mom and pops, so we can preserve that out. We need your support. We are here to support Supervisor Campos. We are here to tell you that it is about merging businesses. It is about bringing small businesses, but it's more important to keep small businesses in the Mission, to keep the cultural relevance. Not too long ago, we celebrated Calle 24. Now we're here to fight to convince you that you need to support this initiative from Supervisor Campos. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Toby Sager, and I live right on 24th Street. I walk down it every day. I'm here actually as part of a group called Open 24th, and we advocate getting rid of empty storefronts on the street. We have a strong request that the proposed prohibition be rewritten as a conditional use, perhaps reducing the size required to trigger conditional use. There are already 19 vacant storefronts on 24th Street. Additional moratoriums could make the situation worse. We don't need more business restrictions, making it harder to open things when there are so many empty storefronts right now. We have a planning department for a reason, and we can get conditional use for these smaller mergers. We don't need more blunt instruments. We need more community involvement deciding what we want on the street. I think if what the supporters are saying is true, that we just need a pause, then surely the fact that Diego from the planning department pointed out that there was actually nothing in the pipeline for mergers happening should be relevant to that. We don't need to pause if nothing's happening. So I urge you to reconsider this as a conditional use and not pass this legislation. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Breon Spenceri, and I live at 25th in Utah and also walk down 24th Street every day. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, and I also oppose this legislation, this proposal, because I feel that the street is underoccupied in terms of its storefronts, and I see that many of these vacant storefronts and many of the storefronts that close early often are a host to I'd consider it dangerous activity at night. I see drug dealing, I see defecation on the streets, I see open intravenous drug use in these storefronts at night, and frankly, I don't feel safe when my female friends walk down the street and get verbally and physically assaulted. I don't love the fact that gunshots are a regular occurrence on the street at night. My house has several bullet holes in it right now as a result of a shooting that occurred on Utah Street about 2.5 weeks ago. And frankly, I'm against any of these blanket proposals that make it more difficult for businesses to move into the district and basically become a steward of the property that they're inhabiting. I think that they have a vested interest to keep the area clean, to keep the area safe. I think that anyone with children who walk down those streets should understand that that kind of safety is a huge benefit to the community. And I would just like to make sure that my voice and everyone's voice is heard equally, all members of the community.
I'm sorry, I have a couple questions just for clarification on your talking points. So you're not in favor of this ordinance because you believe that the businesses that are already in existence shut down, you know, their normal business hours, they shut down, and because they're shut down, that then attracts, as you described.
I see vagrancy in front of both current businesses that shut down early in the day, but mostly in front of the completely vacant storefronts, of which there are quite a few. Jack's has been sitting vacant for a very long time, all along 24th between Potrero and Bryant, or so I'd say are the majority of those storefronts. Many of the storefronts
So it
that
sounds
are
like to
open
me
are-
the issue is vacant storefronts, not
Yes.
necessarily the legislation, but that merchant corridors are struggling. It's not just happening on 24th, it's not just on Potrero, but it's 3rd Street, it's at Leland Avenue and Visitation Valley. I mean, so it's happening all across the city of San Francisco. So it's the vacancy. I just want to make sure that you're not conflating two issues and presenting them as one.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the vacancy, but I also believe that many of the current businesses are not keeping up the area that they're inhabiting right now.
So if they're not keeping it up, then you're saying that they're supporting and they actually want the drug dealing and they want the homeless people and they want the defecation?
No, I'm not suggesting that.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Davis. I'm one of the founders of Open 24th. You've heard from Toby, one of the other members. I'd like to thank the supervisors and actually everyone here for engaging on this issue. It's important to all of us that the Mission is a vibrant neighborhood that we all want to live in. There are two issues that I have with the current legislation. The first was the process by which we arrived at it, and the second are some of the tactics that it's pursuing. The process appears to be one that was not terribly inclusive. I don't feel like I was included in the process, and we've gathered 400 signatures from other residents of the Mission who feel that the legislation and the process that we've gone through does not represent them either. Malia Cohen, your district entirely, was not included in any of this process because it was not part of this district, but it is served by 24th Street. So regardless of what happens with legislation today, Supervisor Campos, I would love to engage with you in more dialogue that includes all of the people affected by this, including everyone in the Mission and people in neighboring districts who use the area. The other issue that I have is with the tactics. We're talking about something very narrow. We're not talking about the rents on storefronts. We're not talking about housing in the Mission. We're talking about whether or not you can combine two storefronts into a larger storefront. A lot of what we've heard is about why doing that is going to bring in businesses that are not good for the neighborhood. But if the concern is to make businesses serve the neighborhood, then a conditional use permitting process seems very sensible. We simply ask whether or not it serves the neighborhood. A large 1,600 square foot business could easily serve the neighborhood by going through this process. I would love to see something like this rather than a blunt instrument that simply blocks all new storefronts. As many people have noted, there are lots of vacant storefronts, and to draw the connection there, starting business is hard. And if we put more blocks in place and force people to shoehorn the business into a smaller space, it may become impossible for them to start that business, or they may have a suboptimal one that doesn't survive. Having businesses open for business is really important for 24th Street and for the neighborhood. I ask you not to change our neighborhood. Don't change it from a vibrant, evolving neighborhood into one that's frozen in time. Thank you.
You know, you say something that's really interesting. I'd agree with you in terms of the connectivity between District 9 and District 10 because we do share that border. And it's through this process that I do realize that how many folks that live in Potrero Hill, my district, that do interface and utilize. As a matter of fact, I have a legislative aide that lives on 24th Street. So I understand that. And I will let you know that I'm doing a better job in working in a more streamlined way, meeting with both the opponents of this as well as the proponents of this legislation so that we can streamline the communication. Supervisor Campos and I have also had some conversations about ways that we can better communicate so that I can better inform my constituents that are interested in this issue. So thanks for bringing that up. That's actually a good point.
Thanks. I look forward to the dialogue.
Perfect. Next speaker.
My name is Leslie Fine, and I live in Malia Cones District. My family has been in San Francisco since the 1930s, helped create the UCSF Medical Center, and I'm proud to be raising a third generation here. I mention that because a lot of the rhetoric is around new technocrats changing the neighborhood, and a lot of people who are concerned have been here for a very long time. Today, you've heard claims that investor types are taking over 24th Street corridor. You've also heard that absolutist legislation will stop the pattern. This is not the first time, with due respect, that Supervisor Campos has employed these kinds of scare tactics and then suggested we address the perceived unfairness with a myopic rule change. It's also not the first time that I feel second-order effects have not been fully considered. We hear about natural turnover, often with significant vacancy gaps, as businesses being forced out. To Breon's point earlier, those 19 stores are vacant, and we hear that businesses are being forced, and yet businesses sit vacant, and I think that was the point that he was trying to drive at. If you dig a little deeper, you'll find that these are part of the natural business cycle. We've heard of health issues, slowing businesses, and shifting priorities. They are not evidence of strong-arm tactics. Rather, I see strong arms on the other side. Proposing legislation without consulting the adjoining neighborhoods, such as Supervisor Cones, or indeed consulting neighbors that don't necessarily share the same cultural heritage. I'd like to imagine the outcry for a moment if the same methods were used on Union or Chestnut Street shopping districts. We've heard it's a temporary measure, but really it sets the default. This is precisely why we have the conditional use permit process, as a way to ensure measured, fair, and evolutionary neighborhood change. San Francisco has very real challenges as we once again experience explosive growth in our economy. The solutions to these challenges don't lie in reactionary, exclusionist, or myopic rules. We need to figure out how to change together.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Barbara Blong. I've been a resident of the Mission since about 1973. I have lived for a long time, for about 40 years, at Bartlett Street at 24th and Mission, and there raised my family. My daughter, a Latina, has attended schools on the 24th Street corridor for many years. So we walked 24th Street and saw and know the stores, know the community, interacted with the people, the newspapers, El Tecolote. Also, we've watched changes here. We've watched the big changes that have gone on Valencia Street and now Mission Street, and now it's happening to 24th Street. And it's very, very sad because 24th Street had remained independent of this with La Victoria, with La Palma, with all of the important cultural institutions and commerce areas. We don't want to let it go, and we're asking you to safeguard it for the people, the community who live and work here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisor. My name is Eric Argoya. I'm with Calle 24. I'm president and co-founder. I just want to submit to each one of the supervisors petitions. We have 2,922 signatures supporting this interim control and the special use districts. I'd like to submit this for the supervisors. And we also have 53 merchants who have also signed the petition, and we're continuing to collect signatures. One thing, there's a lot of misinformation out there right now. You know, we've been proud of 24th Street for quite a few years. We've had the lowest vacancy rate at 3%. It was the lowest vacancy rate in the entire city. Currently, we are up at 4%. And these are vacancy rates. These are spaces that are ready to be leased. Living in the neighborhood for over 50 years, I know what's behind every door along that corridor. There are artists living behind some of them. Sammy's, they have their office space next door to them. It's not an open retail space where people are coming in, but it's office space and someone's utilizing it. Right next door to that one is a TV repairman. That gentleman's been in that space for over 40 years. So the experience that we have on 24th Street and the folks who have been part of 24th Street are people who have been in the neighborhood for a lot of years, and we have new people also in the neighborhood too. But I also want to talk about the crime just a little bit. We did speak to Captain Perea, and told him about what some of the things that were coming up. He says right now that he's getting more calls out of Dolores Park on the weekends than they are out of 24th Street, which was really interesting for us. His point was actually that where there's more foot traffic, where there's more people accumulated, is where you have the most crime. He also stated Valencia towards 18th to 16th and Mission Street from around 18th to 16th Street. So you have a lot of nightlife. You have more people who are vulnerable coming out of the restaurants who have, been drinking. But also, okay, sorry, thank you.
I'm sorry, Eric. We've got a lot of people that we want to get in, hear their voices. Please, next speaker.
My name is Christy Akeem. I'm a member of ACE. And I would like to speak strongly in favor of this measure. And I wish there was more that we could do as an interim measure. But since there's no commercial rent control, I think this is the least that we can do, especially since mergers, storefront mergers, as I understand, can be approved over the counter. I found that very disturbing to learn. I think it's important that we enact something as soon as possible and allow the special use district being planned moving forward by KAI 24 to move forward and to eventually work on a set of conditions, a clear criteria for approving new mergers, with conditions. I'm in favor of this measure also because I'm extremely concerned and distressed at the exodus of low-income families, elders, and people of color in the city. And not just in the Mission, but also in the southeast sector, like the Bayview and Excelsior. And I think it's time that the city develop a really clear set of policies. Aside from, developing housing, we need to address this. So I really do hope you support this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kay Walker, and I'm a member of the Gray Panthers, but I'm speaking as an individual. I am for this ordinance. I think it is modest, and it will help to pause some of the horrific gentrification that's going on in the city in this one district. And I'm hoping that maybe a model will develop from this where other districts, which haven't been hit yet, because there are a lot of small business districts in San Francisco that haven't had this kind of thing happening to them as yet, but it will if we continue, not we, but if it's allowed, this invasion of the wealthy is allowed to go on. My daughter and son-in-law are small business people, and their struggle, somebody should write a book about it. This business of vacant store lots in different districts has a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're too expensive. And people are displaced, and they may even want to stay there. There are five openings, but they're way over the heads of the people that are being evicted or their rents are being raised. So this is, to me, a non-item. My daughter has a clothing store. She's a designer. She makes everything. And she's had to adapt her business. She's gone from Union, The Haight, Noe Valley, a couple other districts. Now she's in West Portal. And she has had to adapt from just retail to teaching sewing, and she likes it. And her husband, who is now also in the clothing business in Noe Valley, they fix up every single store that they've ever gone into because they find something that is so incredibly messed up and cheap that nobody wants it. And they put in the hard labor with their friends, put in flooring, etc.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Sarah Sherburne-Zimmer. I'm a housing rights activist. I'm here to support this legislation. Mostly I work with tenants in residential housing that's being pushed out in San Francisco. But tenants talk all the time about not having someplace to do their laundry anymore. The grocer being pushed out, art spaces being pushed out, youth services, the repair shops they use, even restaurants they can afford, let alone the local places they work. Rents are going up throughout San Francisco, and this includes in commercial spaces. There's not a lot we can do because of the state laws around some of that, but these businesses are important for people's day-to-day lives. And we can't have neighborhoods that are just all fancy restaurants. And we need to make some choices around things that are going to be able to protect the infrastructures of our communities. And I mean, even our space at the nonprofit I work at, our rent is being raised so much we don't know what we're going to do. And that's happening, and we have a commercial storefront. And that's happening everywhere in the city. So I support this measure. I think it's really important for San Francisco. And we need to listen to people in communities about what they need for their blocks, their sections of their neighborhoods, because we don't have the same solutions for every neighborhood, but we need to let people make those solutions together.
Hello, my name is Patricia Kerman. I'm a long-term resident of the Mission District, a longtime resident. I've been there over 30 years. I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the Liberty Hill Neighborhood Association. This is an organization of homeowners, renters, and businesses in nearby Mission community. We strongly support the interim controls for the proposed 24th Street Cultural District. We think the interim control is vital to support and protect the commercial spaces that comprise the unique cultural entities that is the Mission. We urge you to support and protect the special part of the Mission, the future special use of the district and future Latino Cultural District. Liberty Hill neighbors value the diversity that characterizes the streets of the Mission. The heart and soul of this important and vibrant community is 24th Street. The San Francisco would suffer a huge loss if this unique neighborhood is not preserved and is not protected. Many of the communities serving businesses that these interim controls will protect provide jobs for our neighbors, friends, and family. This is where we go to shop for services, to eat, and to drink. This is where we bring our out-of-town guests. The arts are a particular source of pride. The Mission murals are a treasure and a unique resource. We can all appreciate it. They need to be in their proper environment, not in an antiseptic, homogenized surrounding. Open 24th Street proposes to eviscerate any real sense of place, context, and most of all, identity. The murals and businesses must be surrounded by the community and the culture that created them. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Leslie. I've lived in San Francisco for about 10 years. I too am involved with Open 24th. I also work often, with small businesses. I help restaurants, bars, and small businesses manage their staff, their kitchens. And so I've had a lot of direct contact with some of the places on 24th Street. So I have concerns about a blunt measure like this. I would love for us to not allow store mergers to just happen over the counter. I agree with that. So I'm more in favor of making sure that we have discussions, conditional use discussions around this. My thinking here basically is I know a lot of the numbers for a lot of the small businesses in San Francisco because I work with their numbers, and I'm concerned about the business on 24th. I think we all want this area to thrive. We want it to be a beautiful area that's inclusive, has a lot of neat things happening. And in my experience, when there are many thriving businesses, businesses do better. So the rents are going up, and that sucks for small businesses. And I'm concerned that if we create too many measures that block growth on this corridor, that those small businesses won't be able to keep up, that we'll be eliminating the foot traffic that will ultimately lead to them doing better and being able to stay there and being able to provide really neat and helpful things for this area. And I'm also really excited to be here. I think this is really great that this has brought up this many people to have this conversation, and I love the work that a lot of folks have been doing. Whether or not we agree with the right way to do this, I am excited that we're all here to support this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Carolina Vallejo. I am member with ACE, and also I own a small print shop in the Mission Bernal Heights district neighborhood. My business has been there since 1982. I took over 4 years ago. I'm currently on a month-to-month lease, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to be there. I want to stay there. I provide a lot of services for the people from the neighborhood, but there's no help for us. There's small businesses do not have enough help from the city, and I think even if it's a little bit of help, if we can get it, it will be great because we want to stay there. I want to stay there. I love my job. I love what to do. I love the services that I provide to my community, but it's very difficult times. So. I am pro on this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Julian Ball. I'm an organizer with San Francisco ACE. I organize in the Mission Bernal Heights chapter. And we're a group of low and moderate income residents. And in the neighborhood, people join for all sorts of reasons. We do a lot of work on housing. But it all comes down to people feeling like they're losing their community, and that the changes around them mean that they're losing the culture all around them, the diverse community of the Mission. And part of that is the businesses they go to, affordable businesses that serve the community. And what we're hearing is people feel like they've already lost Valencia, right? You go down. And what does it mean when you merge retail spaces or get a more upscale business? It means that a lot of times the businesses that are there in their place are not only not affordable, but don't provide services that longtime residents need. It also means rents go up all over. If you have more upscale businesses, it means you attract higher rents in housing and in retail. And so these are just common sense temporary measures, and so here to support Calle 24. Thanks.
Hi, Iris Biblowitz. I've been in the Mission for 40 years. Stroll down 24th Street, Sous Burr, a new French restaurant, Rabbit Crepinette. I don't know what that is, but it's $28. I've heard that the prefix is $85. Locals Eatery, Halibut, $30. Tomato risotto, an appetizer, $9. Wise Son pastrami sandwich, $13.50. Elle's Cafe, bagel and cream cheese, $3. Sunrise Restaurant, pupusas, $2.50. Taqueria San Francisco, burritos, $7. Tacos are $3. The latter three small restaurants, community restaurants, are struggling to survive, worried that their leases will increase. Who can afford to eat and where can they afford to eat? More upscale restaurants lead to less affordable food for most longtime Mission residents and families, and an increase of people with a lot more money than most of us have, increase in evictions. It's all connected, and that's what we've been seeing. 1/4 of San Francisco, I heard, in December 2014 in the Examiner, cannot afford nutritious food. Meanwhile, on January 28, 2015, there was a devastating fire on Mission and 22nd Street. One man died, Mauricio Orellano, and the fire displaced 18 families, 58 people, including children. In addition to those people who are still waiting to go back to their devastated apartments, 36 small businesses were destroyed, 71 people lost their livelihoods, many of them Latinos. 24th Street Cultural District is the perfect place for these small mom-and-pop businesses. Antojitos Salvadoreños, Aminta, Taqueria La Tanya, which Ramon Valle describes as his labor of love for 30 years, Bay Area Fish and Poultry, El Parol, Immigration Services, Angels Flowers. These are all small mom-and-pops that are going one by one because... Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wendy Bardsley, and I've been in Calle 24, the neighborhood, for just about 30 years, and I'm also honored to be a member of the council. I'm a recent member, maybe 2 years in, but over the years, I've seen nobody do as much for the safety of this neighborhood as Calle 24, and that needs to be called out with all of these safety concerns. We did have a process of open meetings that were publicized by consultants to the neighborhood, and we invited everybody and anybody in the neighborhood to come. And during that process, I was really, really struck by one observation over and over again, how important the living culture of this neighborhood was. I went to some of the first gatherings of artists during one of these open meetings, and these are artists by all color, all nationalities. It was very inclusive. And they talked about how the culture of Calle 24 lives in, like, Casa Lucas, lives in all the little stores and the little family-owned businesses and family-run businesses that we are so lucky to have, that people from all over the world visit us to just feel what that sense of community feels like. Now, the thing about conditional use, I just want to bring up one thing about conditional use, is that it's not an easy process to navigate. And for people who are facing month to month, like their livelihood is going to be gone, it may be beyond them. It may very well be beyond them when there aren't like real defined measures put into place. So how can we work together to make sure that there's a way that they can feel safe in their leases and that their rent isn't going to...
Thank you.
My name is Tom Ray. I'm a native San Franciscan and live in the Mission District, and I'm a member of a Mission Bernal ACE. Last year, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors approved a resolution to designate 24th Street a Latino cultural district, and Mayor Lee approved it as well. Now, real estate and investment property interests want to buy up properties and merge retail spaces to make an even bigger profit. These investment properties will have a high turnover rate because of high rents, while the investment property managers make the real profit. This will also encourage other landlords to sell out to make a profit to create more of these type of mini space businesses. How can these new businesses be the foundation of a Latino cultural district? If you want cultural and racial diversity in San Francisco, you must preserve the cultural and ethnic neighborhood businesses. They are the foundation at what creates a cultural community: products, jobs, community centers, entertainment, and services that reflect the cultural and ethnic community. Like in Chinatown. Chinatown has protected so far because of past efforts by community and business leaders that created zoning laws to protect it many years ago. It is still there. The Mission District and 24th Street needs this as well, or it will not be there in the future. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name's Matthew Rogers, and I lived in the city for over 30 years.
Into the mic, Mr. Roberts.
Rogers.
Rogers. See, I couldn't even hear you. Got it.
Okay. I'm here to support the interim prohibition. I think this is a measured approach at this point. There needs to be more time. One only has to look at New York City to see what's going on for us in the future. Currently in New York City, businesses, restaurants, mom and pops have been cleared out, and what comes in is large national chains and banks. Do we want a sterile community? This is the Latino cultural community. If we're we need to protect these things, otherwise it will be nothing. People won't come here. We won't have any tourists coming. The artists and the musicians are basically all gone already. We need to do everything we can to retain these businesses because that's all we have at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Patricia Crahan, and I support Supervisor Campos' ordinance. My husband and I have lived in the same house in the Mission since 1978. We raised both our children here, and they still make their home in the Mission. When they were young, we always made 24th Street our destination for running errands, purchasing small items, going for an ice cream at St. Francis. I still shop there several times a week for fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh tortillas, jewelry repair, many different items. It's a collection of small space stores which serve the basic needs of the community. After reading about this ordinance, I can't help but reflect upon the irony of the new residents' influx. These are people who are drawn to the Mission because it's different. It has a history, it has art and culture, and it's a vibrant, diverse population. Kind of irresistible. That's why people want to live here. However, no sooner than moving into this district, they want it changed. They want fancy and high-end restaurants that they can walk to. Personally, I would suggest just walking over to Valencia Street or hopping on the 48, where all those restaurants are already over there. But to accomplish this transformation or opening up the 24th Street, developers want to merge these small business spaces to make way for larger ones. These larger spaces are out of the range of affordability of the existing merchants. They would not be able to afford those kinds of monthly rents. Additionally, it's inevitable that if rents raise on one part of 24th Street, it will do the same on the other, causing all our small retailers to vacate their businesses and move elsewhere or cease to have a business. That's the irony of new residential influx. What originally draws new residents to an area then becomes something to be molded and manipulated. The diversity, beauty, liveliness of an established community is watered down or lost completely.
Come on, you guys know the rules. You know there's no applause going on in here. Spirit fingers or a snap. That was nice. I heard you guys snapping. That's good. We just got to move this thing forward so we can make sure we get hear everyone's voice.
And I'll be fast.
All right.
I think I'm one of those water her downers. I've been here for 20 years. I'm a community advocate. I have worked in my neighborhood together with all cultures in my neighborhood to improve access to care. We have gotten squatters out of our neighborhood, but we have committed ourselves to our neighborhood for the past 20 years. And I want everyone to know that we will continue to do that. We just ask, can we be allowed to sit at the table? We have not been able to join the meetings. We are community. We're a part of community. We're 40% of community. And we just want to be part of the meeting. And if we could, trust us. We're not looking to say Latin is bad and other is good. Not at all. What we're looking to say is, trust us, we are a valid part of the community. We're not gentrifier, make big business, thingama. We are valid, and we need to have our voices heard. And right now, they're not being heard. So when I hear the word community time and again, I really get concerned that my neighbor Donna and Lily and Lupe have not been heard, but it's being inferred that they're heard. So if you ask us to the table, if you ask us to join the discussion, we will do it in good faith, we will do it honestly, and we will do it thinking about the community that we've devoted our lives to. That includes the Latino part of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, hi. I'm Brooke Oliver. I'm in the Latino Cultural District. I sit on its council. I have a business there for 20 years. I've lived there for 20 years, and I'm a landlord for 20 years in that neighborhood. I have a seat at the table. I'm on the 24th Street Council, and other people are welcome to have a seat on the table in our community process. We invite it. We sent 3,000 leaflets out. Everybody that walked on the street had an invitation to all those meetings, and I know that we will continue to welcome others' voices in our meetings. We don't welcome being condemned publicly for having a lack of integrity, because our integrity was outstanding, and we worked really, really hard to make a fair and open process. So recent attacks have been really unfair, and I ask people to join us rather than fight us. As to the conditional use permit, the conditional use, I'm really in favor of this prohibition. As a business owner who has tried to start other businesses on 24th Street and looked at spaces that are available, the rents of larger spaces are much more expensive. And when you're starting a small business, you can't take on a huge overhead unless you're a substantially large business with great deal of financial backing. So if you're just a regular small business person without financial investors, you can't afford $8,000, $10,000, $20,000 a month rent. So the smaller spaces allow us who are entrepreneurs to create such businesses. A conditional use application comes after a really long series of events before an application is ever filed. There are real estate people who shoot for locations, who then approach landlords with heavy and hefty offers, or businesses with hefty buyout offers, just to be able to merge those spaces. A conditional use process creates uncertainty among investors too, because if you know what's not allowed,
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Catherine Arbite, and I live in Potrero Hill, just a few minutes walk from 24th Street. I rely on 24th Street to access locally owned shops and restaurants of all types and varieties. I was disappointed to learn about the proposed moratorium for a couple reasons. First off, you've heard about the vacant storefronts. I don't need to belabor that. You've heard about how hard it is for small business owners on 24th Street, and I just have to ask why on earth we would put up more restrictions. Second, there's only been a handful of storefront mergers on 24th Street in recent memory. Yes, storefront mergers have allowed for Suvere Kitchen to come in, but they've also allowed for Casa Lucas Market and El Chico Produce to provide fresh groceries, services, and job opportunities for the community. 3 mergers over many years is hardly an epidemic that would seem to justify an emergency moratorium, and I feel it's somewhat disingenuous to portray it that way. A blanket ban on these types of opportunities, I feel, would harm 24th Street's future. You have before you an alternative proposal from Open 24th that would require storefronts to get a conditional use permit. This proposal allows for community review and discussion of the impacts, positive and negative, of storefront mergers on a case-by-case basis. It also protects businesses of important cultural significance. Open 24th's proposal supports greater flexibility and transparency in the decision-making process and stands in contrast to Campos's moratorium, which would exclude ongoing community involvement and dialogue. Our local businesses need to be supported, not stifled. Please don't vote for this moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Supervisor Cohen, Supervisor Wiener, and Supervisor Campos, thank you for your time today. My name is Samantha Higgins, and I'm here on behalf of the Golden Gate Restaurant Association to speak in support of the interim prohibition on commercial mergers in the proposed Calle 24 Special Use District. I would like to first thank Supervisor Campos for his leadership in not pursuing a moratorium on restaurants. I believe that a diversity of restaurants in a neighborhood provides good jobs and provides a lot of neighborhood character. I would also like to thank KIA 24 for their advocacy for the cultural district. Golden Gate Restaurant Association supports interim merger controls, and we look forward to working with both Supervisor Campos and KIA 24 to come up with long-term solutions that support the neighborhood. We generally believe that a conditional use approach will ultimately be the right one in determining mergers, but we respect the urgency for an interim approach while exploring a more comprehensive way to support the neighborhood. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Fitzgerald. I want to tell you what I love about the Mission District. Yesterday I was at Fiestas Fridas. There were 47 people dressed like the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. There were flowers in our hair. There were 47 women and girls and a few guys. We all took selfies to honor her tradition of painting self-portraits. Other fun things I've done in the Mission in the past year is watch my sister dance in the Carnival Parade. I've participated in the Day of the Dead procession. I've also taught art classes at Cressida Eyes Mural Center, which is a wonderful resource on 24th Street. I also love our outdoor public pool and the bike lanes. I'm speaking today in support of David Campos's ordinance. I also supported his luxury development moratorium, and I was sorry to see that defeated last month after the 7-hour Board of Supervisors meeting. I stand with the people of the Mission who spoke that night in favor of the moratorium. New, bigger restaurants should not be a priority in a neighborhood with such high numbers of evictions and displacement. People and organizations that are on 24th Street should be allowed to stay and flourish. Please don't let market forces determine the fate of the Mission District. Help preserve the existing culture of the Mission. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Susan Marsh. Two things really briefly. First of all, I have to say that I am somewhat embarrassed and disturbed at the racial undertones of some, and let me repeat, some of the speakers in opposition to these interim controls. This has no place in public discourse in this town in this day and age. The second thing that I'm going to say is that I'm even less impressed with the arguments of the opposition to these interim controls, which attempt to juxtapose conditional use permits to the interim controls. We have a situation where planning department staff is coming here and asking for time to craft a conditional use process and requirements and other controls that will actually make the special use district an effective tool for preserving Latino culture in the Mission District, and particularly on 24th Street. There is no opposition. This is a straw man, and I would ask that you reject it, and I would ask that you pass these controls on to the full board, and that you protect the Latino culture of the Mission. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gladys Soto. Hi. I'm a Latina immigrant who came here 27 years ago. From day one, when I came to San Francisco, the only thing I've always wanted is to be part of the community. When I came, I was not part of this community because I was a Latina, I was an immigrant, and I have not stopped one day, and people who know me know that it's true, to develop what we have right now. And the way I was raised is to respect your elders. That's how I see, no offense to anybody, Eric Arguello, Miguel Bustos, Roberto Hernandez, all of the people that I always look up to. The way I was raised is to, when you go to a place, you learn, and then you try to help them. I have worked in the substance abuse mental health field for 22 years. And I hear somebody who is younger that I know he has a big heart. But to say that those drug dealers, stinkies, they gross by them, I have dedicated my entire life to make a difference. If you're really concerned, do something about it. Don't just come and complain and say those stinky people, get rid of them, and we need to get new people. That's hurt my feelings. I mean, imagine other people's feelings are hurt too. I know that those people that have good heart, the people that are opposing this, they want to have a clean city. We all do. I welcome them, and the last person who say a woman is my friend, she has my number. If she really wants to be part of it, she can call me. I think we are welcoming everybody. I'm thank you. I wasn't planning to speak, but I have to say something about the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker. Yes.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Fernando Martin. I'm here in support of the interim controls on restaurant mergers. I walk and bike 24th Street practically every day with my kid on his way either to Leonard Flynn Elementary or right now to the Secret Garden on Harrison Street. I want to say it's true. Change happens. Businesses change. Neighborhoods change. But sometimes change is happened onto you. Sometimes there are real estate agents who walk up and down those same streets, calling each landlord to find out how much in rent those businesses are paying and will they accept a bigger offer. Sometimes there are landlords who keep their storefronts vacant, waiting for that next big development to come in, where they can then sell that space to the next big restaurant that might serve them. Sometimes there are restaurants, bigger restaurants, who want to move into spaces where smaller places have been for a long time. I think one of the things about change happening is that sometimes communities come together, the businesses come together, people like Eric Arguello who know those businesses intimately, organize with them for over 20 years, and present solutions that come from those businesses for you to consider and hopefully to pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Yes, my name is Jonathan Ute with the Cultural Action Network. Thank you for hearing the public. I stand here in support of the interim controls, and I just want to put it in perspective. We're talking about a process that was approved for a Latino cultural district, and that process is not fully unfolded. We have a 45-day, a month and a half sort of interim control for the planning department, which came and spoke in support of this 45-day window to craft and not be distracted by conditional use permits while they craft a new condition. So I just want to put that in perspective. We're also just talking about forwarding this to the Board of Supervisors full meeting. So it seems like having the mayor's office here, the planning department here, having nearly 100 speakers in support and only 3 to 4 in opposition, it seems like a very simple decision to make. It's just making time for the cultural district to fully present the options and to work through the process that it needs, and that is clearly identified to you today. So that's why I'm here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Steven, and I live on Alabama Street off of 24th Street. My partner and I moved to the Mission District 3 years ago, specifically because we love 24th Street. We love the diversity, the Latino culture on it. We could have moved to Valencia Street, but no, this is where we wanted to live. So I think you can tell there's a lot of passion in the room and in the community about the street. And I think it's important to find an effective tool to help retain the character of this neighborhood and make it an integrated neighborhood. I mean, the fact is it is changing, but we don't have to lose the heart and soul of the neighborhood. Supervisor Cohen, thank you so much for bringing up the idea of a citizens committee. I think that is extremely important. In my previous neighborhoods, I participated with Eureka Valley Neighborhood Association and also with VV Boom and Visitation Valley. And I've always been welcomed with open arms to bring diverse opinions, ideas. I've been finding it very hard, and I know that Calle 24 has very important work to do, but I'm dismayed to find that even this morning I talked to business owners who don't even know that this law is being proposed. So I really urge that a citizen committee be formed, and I urge that Calle 24 post their meeting times on their website, including their council meetings, because it's not just me. A lot of people have asked and have been met with silence when asked about when the meeting times are. So I am in favor of the conditional use permit, and I say this not because I think that small businesses are important. I think they're very important, and so important, in fact, we need to use a tool that has been proven to be successful. And conditional use permits, in my experience with other neighborhood groups, have kept out formula retail, have kept out businesses that don't conform with the character of the neighborhood. One of the speakers mentioned that this moratorium.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name's Marie Sorensen. I'm part of Calle 24. I hope everybody can hear me because a lot of people don't talk very loud. I'd like to invite the previous speaker and some of the Open 24 people to come to our meetings. We went through we have been around for years, and we have had meetings for years. And now all of a sudden people are saying, oh, well, they're not inviting us. Okay, I'm beyond that. One of the things I'd like to talk about is the fact that we have 33% bars and restaurants on our street. I think that's enough. I don't think we really need any more. We're lucky enough to have a hardware store, health food stores, vegetable stores, meat stores. We have a nice variety of stores on our street. I don't want big spaces with more expensive restaurants coming in. And for those people that do, just freaking walk up to Valencia Street. Take the 48, take the 22, take the 9. You can find a lot there. And part of what I really do love is the sidewalks roll up at night. I like the fact that it is a real neighborhood. I walk home on the last BART train at 24th, and very often I'm the only person walking up the street. I don't know why, and that doesn't make me feel in danger. I kind of want to call on the carpet people that say it's dangerous to walk, dangerous to walk around. My God, I am handicapped. I have 12 artificial body parts, and yeah, I don't get catcalled anymore because I'm old. But the fact of the matter is, I don't ever feel unsafe walking around the neighborhood. Thank you.
Ow! Thank you. Next speaker.
It's going to be hard to keep a straight face. All right. Hi, my name is Chirag Bhakta. I am from Mission SRO Collaborative and Dolores Street.
I'm sorry.
Community.
You always say your name so fast. I see you all the time, but what is your name?
Chirag.
Cheetah. Good to see you again.
You too. I'm Dolores Street Community Services, also born and raised in the city. Tenderloin to be specific. Shout out to the supervisor. And I'm just going to briefly read a statement from Calle 24 up here. So Calle 24 is home to Carnaval San Francisco. We host the Cesar Chavez Festival, Dia de los Muertos, Acción Latinos Canto Popular, the Frida Kahlo Festival, Valle en las Calles, Red Poppy Arts House, MAP. We are the birthplace of Latin rock with Carlos Santa, Malo, Sapo, and other Latin bands. We are the birthplace of the mural movement in San Francisco with the Mujeres Muralistas and Balmy Alley. We have the highest concentration of murals on 12 blocks in San Francisco. We have the highest concentration of legacy businesses on 12 blocks. These are businesses that are the anchors of 24th and have been around for more than 30 years, with some going back to the 1920s. We host classic car shows with lowriders at events and monthly rides through 24th. We host mural tours with Presida Eye Visitor Centers. International artists like Susan Cervantes, Michael Rios, Michael Roman, Ray Yanes call Calle 24 home. Mayor Lee and all the members of the Board of Supervisors have acknowledged the contributions and history of Calle 24, dedicating it officially as a Latino cultural district. And then to end the statement, to add my 2 cents, if you want to keep families in the mission, if you want to be serious about putting forth common sense policies, and if you don't want 24th Street to look like Valencia Street, then just pass this, move this item to the Board of Supervisors with your recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I would like to thank Campos for putting this legislation forward, even though we've been on an uphill battle. I'm John Mendoza with Calle 24. I've been with Calle 24 since the beginning, since I was Marie Sorensen, myself, and Eric Arguello. And as we've changed into Calle 24, we have never worked harder. We've brought on a board of almost 30 of us who are like nonstop, hourly just working on improving. And to the row in the back here who oppose us, it's like, where were you 20 years ago? I've been doing this for 20 years. This is kind of my life's work. So sometimes I get passionate about it. Sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes I'm disrespectful. But this is no nonsense legislation. It just gives us time to roll out the rest of what we're trying to do. Thank you.
It's Sue Hester. I am in support of this ordinance. This is a really simple ordinance. It says timeout for 45 days, no mergers. It doesn't say no rents, no vacant storefronts can be rented. It only says no mergers. Mergers are not controlled by the planning code. They're over the counter. There are 0 standards for conditional uses on 24th Street in the planning code. When other conditional uses have been formed, it has been after a planning period. There's a 45-day period here to get standards together. The planning department doesn't do very well by conditional uses without standards. We've had that at the Planning Commission. It would be on Thursday is the last hearing. Planning Commission said explicitly 899 Valencia needed to be broken up into 3 storefronts. It was intentional, and the staff ignored the Planning Commission, and they came in with a proposal to have 1 massive storefront. The people from Valencia Street that were merchants were freaking out at the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission did the difficult thing and said no to CMPMC. They couldn't wipe out the entire storefront of that part of Valencia Street. So if the planning department doesn't do CUs that well, and they don't, and we need specific standards for 24th Street, and it's only 45 days, and vacant storefronts can be rented. They just can't be merged. I don't see where there's any problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Others?
Members of the board, my name is Miguel Bustos. I'm a member of Calle 24. I am a lifelong resident for 45 years on 24th and Harrison, right in the heart of this location where this legislation that I support is being called for. You know, the conditional use permitting process does not address affordability or preservation. And small business spaces are important because small businesses are important to the fabric of this city. Not only to the fabric of the mission, but to the fabric of the city. And this was evident when, not too long ago, we had the formula retail legislation that went through, which thank you for championing that, Supervisor Wiener, because you understood the importance of having the character of many communities, and we didn't want chains here. And because of that, we're able to have small businesses. So this is in the same spirit, that we want to preserve small spaces so that small businesses could thrive. You know, we fought against the Archdiocese, many of us Latino, many of us Catholics, and we thought this was so important that we were able to fight back the Archbishop and save 2 retail stores, 2 spaces, meaning 2 families that had their own businesses. And for us, we cannot forget that some of the empty spaces that, and I live there, so I've counted them. It's not 19. You know, I counted 3. And what I did see is that Alan McCarthy's space was once a small businesses. He illegally combined them to make it a big space because he forced out the old tenant to do this spot to get higher rents. And right now he's asking for $12,500 a month. So this is a Latino cultural historic district. It's important because, you know, people are moving in and they forget that this is a district, a cultural district with its life and its integrity.
So if I may, just wanted to ask a question because happy to see Commissioner Bustos here. What's your biggest fear as a longtime resident?
You know, thank you for asking. My biggest fear is that you have people who've been invested, who've lived there, who've made the best of the mission. You have us asking and begging for this. And then you have folks that just come in. All of a sudden, it's not enough. And they act like Christopher Columbus discovering America, as if no one else was there. And they want clean streets. They say they want safety. And so whether you act like Christopher Columbus or the second coming of Christ. So for me, my biggest fear is that, you know what? We lose the essence of what we are as a city by losing the essence of what we are as Calle 24, as a mission. I would hope we do the same thing for the African American community. The city, it's losing its diversity. And when I hear some of the opponents say, well, we want diversity, it means less of us. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much for your comments, everyone. Thank you for coming. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak? No? Okay, public comment is closed. Supervisor Campos, do you have some brief remarks?
Just briefly, Madam Chair, I want to thank all the members of the public that came out and spoke on all sides of this issue. I think those who have concerns about some of the things that have been proposed, I encourage them to become involved in this process. One of the problems that I have with the way in which this process has been described is, you know, the reference to Calle 24 as an exclusive entity. The reality is that the Board of Supervisors and the mayor created this council, and the idea has been and will continue to be to include every member of this community. And the beauty about 24th Street is what makes 24th Street unique is the fact that there are so many diverse people with a lot of diverse views. And so I encourage you to be involved. The last thing that I would say is this, that one of the things that this community made very clear following this process is that they actually wanted a lot more that's included in the interim controls. One of the things that actually was discussed and requested at some point was to actually have a ban on restaurants. And I appreciate that the Golden Gate Restaurant Association has come out in favor of these interim controls because they recognize that what was proposed in the end was actually very measured, very balanced, simply a very narrow focus on mergers as opposed to a ban on restaurants. So it is a very balanced approach, and colleagues, I ask for your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all the members of the public who came out on both sides. This is actually, we've had some rough sledding here in City Hall with some of the hearings we've had recently, and I actually have to say this is what happened today is exactly how public comment should be. People were passionate and vociferous and direct, and on both sides were extremely respectful to the other side. And I think that's exactly how the democratic process should work. So I want to thank everyone, even including the people who are very critical of my point of view, because that's democracy and we're all entitled to be critical of each other. And I do want to say the interesting thing is, and I think I said this during the debate on the mission moratorium, that I think most people on both sides had the same end goal of having, in that case, a more affordable housing situation, but there was a sharp divide in terms of how best to get there and what was going to get us there. And I think the same is true today. I think everyone wants 24th Street to be safe, vibrant, and diverse street. And I just think that there are different views on how to get there. I do want to say that I think we've heard some comments today about long-term versus newer residents, or Christopher Columbus, or whatever the comments were. I heard long-term residents on both sides of this debate, and a number of the opponents indicated that they had lived in the Mission for 20 or 30 years. So I think that there are long-term and I imagine short-term residents on both sides of this one. Again, a good faith policy disagreement. It's really interesting that I've actually proposed and legislated conditional use requirements in a number of different occasions. I co-sponsor legislation to subject banks to conditional use through formula retail. As I mentioned, Supervisor Campos and I co-authored the Valencia Street conditional use controls, and as I recall it, actually, the merchants came to us asking for a ban on conversion of retail to restaurant, and we went with the conditional use instead. I authored legislation in Castro and Noe Valley to require conditional use to put an office use on the ground floor retail, because retail is important on the ground floor for commercial life in a neighborhood. And every time I propose a conditional use, there are people who take shots at me telling me that I'm being anti-business, that I'm being too restrictive, that I'm being too hard on these businesses that are just trying to come in, and I'm just going to promote vacancies and so on and so forth. And that's the case because the conditional use is not weak. The conditional use is actually quite strong. It is a challenging process to go through, sometimes too challenging for some small businesses. And so it's not a process that you just slide through. And I will say, and again, I know most about my district because I work on a lot of the different projects or follow a lot of the projects that are moving forward. Many conditional uses have been defeated at the Planning Commission. A lot of conditional uses do get defeated when there is opposition. If it's non-controversial, then typically we'll go through. But I will spare you, but I can go through a list that I have in my head of conditional uses that have been defeated just in my district, and I know it's happened in other districts as well. So I don't agree with the notion that conditional use is somehow a weak tool. It is a very, very strong and flexible tool. I just think, as I mentioned at the beginning, that a ban here is it is too not just strong a response, but it's a response that will not give enough flexibility, and it will have unintended consequences. I mentioned what happened with the restaurant cap, which was effectively a ban. And in fact, Supervisor Campos, Supervisor Kim, and I went through, I think, years of process around the Mission alcohol controls, which were effectively a ban, and then ended up having very, very negative unintended consequences about new and creative uses, including, for example, the Roxy Theater could not sell beer or wine. And so, we ended up significantly scaling back that effectively a ban and made it a more flexible thing so it could be more case by case, understanding that there were good alcohol uses and problematic alcohol uses. So with all that said, I'm not prepared to support this in its current form. I would support it if we amended it to convert the ban into a conditional use. I know what Supervisor Kim's view on that is. I don't know what Supervisor Cohen's view is on it, and I'll either be in the majority or I'll be in the minority, and then we can move forward. So
thank you,
colleagues.
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Just wanted to add a couple of comments to the discussion. As Supervisor Wiener said, I've already made clear my support for the ordinance that is moving before us today. I want to say that I do appreciate Supervisor Wiener's points. Our office has introduced, I believe, 3 to 4 interim controls in our districts. 2 were prohibitions and 2, I believe, were conditional use. And we've always had a lengthy conversation with our community and neighborhood about what is more appropriate given the circumstances that we're seeing. One example I'll give in the mid-market corridor, where we are seeing really fast development of formerly vacant office buildings, there was a concern that there was already too much formula retail, and that we wanted a process to at least examine each new formula retail in that corridor as planning department completed their study of formula retail controls throughout the city. I think we understand on Market Street it is a major corridor, that this is a downtown corridor where we often have formula retail and we often have large footprints available for those types of businesses. So in that case, we wanted to strike a balance, and so we did a conditional use in that interim control. We've also submitted interim controls that have had unanimous support by this board, where we've actually done a full-out prohibition, where we feel the market is moving too quickly, and we need a planning process in place to examine the patterns that we're seeing. The example that I'll bring up of a prohibition is that we have prohibited any conversion from PDR, which is production, distribution, and repair, often our manufacturing and art spaces, to office or residential during the Central Soma plan. We just felt that it was happening too quickly, both legally and illegally, and that we were rapidly losing our spaces for living wage jobs and for arts and nonprofits, and that this deserved a complete pause during the Central Soma planning process. So I think that there are arguments for both. What I'm seeing before us today on Calle 24 is something more akin to what I see in Central Soma, which is we are rapidly losing space, and we absolutely should put a pause on it while we study it. It doesn't mean that after the study that a prohibition will be in place. At that point, maybe a conditional use will be more appropriate. And at that time, we'll actually have a set of criteria by which we'll ask the planning department to apply the conditional use. And they'll have studied it, and they'll know what we'd like to see. This is, again, temporary. It is an interim control. It's not a complete prohibition in the long term. I think we've heard a lot from the residents in terms of why supporting small businesses is incredibly important. In fact, it's really, it's part of our priority policy that we look at controls that will preserve and enhance existing neighborhoods serving retail, and enhance future opportunities for residential employment in and ownership of such businesses. We know that smaller footprints do that. Large footprints make it very challenging for residents to start businesses and also to hire locally. So I think that this is something that will be a positive in moving forward. I just want to add to the Mission Alcohol Special Use District conversation that Supervisor Wiener brought up, something that Supervisor Campos, myself, and Supervisor Wiener have all worked on. When it was originally proposed, I actually think that it was appropriate for the neighborhood. There were too many liquor stores in this part of the Mission, and I certainly see it in the Tenderloin in the neighborhood that I represent today. At the time, I think a prohibition of off-sale liquor and liquor licenses was absolutely appropriate. Now, today, especially along the Valencia-Guerrero corridor, with venues like Mission Bowling, the neighborhood has rapidly changed. We're seeing positive businesses coming in that have also liquor off sale and on site, and they're not contributing negatively to the neighborhood, both either in criminal activity or other negative repercussions. So in that case, it made sense to become more flexible, and that's the thing with planning. So even if moving forward, we have a prohibition on commercial mergers in this proposed special use district. There's nothing in the future there's nothing preventing the board in the future from overturning that if that is no longer appropriate for this neighborhood. So I will be supporting this item today.
Thank you. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to respond to Supervisor Wiener, and again, I appreciate the comments about the conditional use, and again, it may be that a conditional use in the end is the right approach for purposes of a special use district, but in this case, the community has considered a conditional use, and for the reasons that were explained before, including the reasons outlined by the Planning Department, while a conditional use perhaps is the right approach in District 8, it is not the right approach at this particular time for this section of District 9. So with that, I will ask my colleagues to please forward the ordinance that is before you with the amendments that I have proposed, and I would respectfully ask that you forward this item as with the amendments with a positive recommendation to the full board, and I would ask all my colleagues to please consider providing some deference to the residents of this district. And again, I want to thank the mayor and the planning department and the mayor's office of workforce and economic development for their support.
All right, thank you. So before we take these motions and we go to a vote, I have a couple comments that I wanted to share with everyone and express that I have a deep understanding that there are some concerns about the proposal as it is, but it is an interim measure. I want to also remind people that I have previously sponsored interim controls as a way to stop displacement, particularly. This was in the design center. You may recall when artists and PDR spaces were in jeopardy of losing their space due to a tech company's interest in coming in. And we established a conditional use as a process and a criteria for the office conversions in the design center. This process did give us an opportunity to get some breathing room and to come up with a more comprehensive solution that was thoughtful and measured and fair to all parties involved. Really the point that I'm trying to drive home today is that we may end up with a conditional use requirement in the special use district after all. I think it's just going to take us some time to get there. I agree that we do need to have diversity on the commercial corridor. I think that word is thrown around very freely in this city. I'm not quite sure how people are defining diversity, but I am always keeping a watchful eye on that definition. I think we all have different working definitions of what diversity is. So I'm prepared to support this temporary measure as a means to pause any new mergers and give everyone an opportunity to work on the permanent controls, but I will be watching this process, and I would encourage everyone to be inclusive as possible, and this is an all-hands-on-deck opportunity to really have a strong impact in the neighborhood that we all profess to love. So I have a question to the city attorney. Will we need to take separate motions for the amendments that Supervisor Campos has introduced?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Supervisor Campos. Thank you, Mr. Assistant District
Deputy.
Deputy. Whatever. Okay. All right. You know what I'm talking about. It's a long day, okay? We still got one more item we got to get through. How many amendments, Supervisor Campos, did you have before us?
I think it's just one set of amendments.
Okay, perfect. So let's if I can get a motion to accept.
So move.
Wow. Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Okay.
A second.
All right. Okay. So without any objections, this motion passes. This is to the amended legislation. Thank you.
The amendments are adopted.
The amendments are adopted to the legislation. Thank you, to the proposed legislation. Now, Supervisor Campos has made a motion, but I need it to be made by a member of this body to move this legislation forward as amended, but to the July 28th board meeting. May I have that motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second on this motion?
There doesn't need to be a second.
Okay. Supervisor Wiener likes to remind me there doesn't need to be a second on this motion, which is correct. Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. So I'd like to take a roll call vote on this motion, please. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Okay. On the motion to recommend to the board for July 28th.
Yes, ma'am.
Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
No.
Wiener, no. And Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Two ayes, one no.
Thank you very much. The ayes have it, ladies and gentlemen. This motion passes and it moves forward with as amended. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We still have one more item. Item number 6, Madam Clerk, could you please call it?
Yes, item number 6 is the ordinance amending the planning code to clarify that the inclusionary affordable housing program applies to group housing projects.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Avalos and Kim are the authors of this item. We have joining with us Supervisor Avalos, and I'd first like to recognize Supervisor Kim. And we also have joining us Supervisor Christensen. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I don't know if Supervisor Avalos wanted to go before me.
I think I found my place here, but thank you for... Madam Chair, thank you for calling this hearing on this legislation. And I want to also thank my co-sponsors to this, Supervisor Kim, who is also looking at this idea as well. This ordinance clarifies that the inclusionary housing program applies to group housing projects. Group housing is housing that does not include an individual kitchen for each dwelling unit, like a boarding house. The Inclusionary Affordable Housing Program was created in 2002, and the program is based on the fact that building more luxury housing increases the need for low-income workers and therefore increases demand for affordable housing. And the Inclusionary Housing Program has always been designed to apply to a wide range of types of housing. The definition of housing projects subject to the inclusionary requirement has always explicitly included group housing, but at some point the planning department made an unofficial determination that group housing was not subject to the inclusionary housing program. However, this determination was never formalized in a written zoning administrator determination, which could have been appealed to the Board of Appeals. Therefore, we only recently became aware of this unofficial policy. And recently, developers have proposed a number of market rate group housing projects that has brought to light the fact that the planning department is currently not requiring them to comply with the inclusionary housing program. So this ordinance clarifies that the planning department is to follow the original language of the inclusionary housing program and apply it to group housing. I believe we have staff who are also here from the planning department to present, Kimia Hadadan, and I believe we also have some amendments that I believe you'll be prepared to talk about as well, Ms. Hadadan, so I appreciate that. The amendments I have copies of, there are 3 essential ones that Ms. Hadadan will go over. And then also my colleagues have other comments to add as well, and there's an amendment that has come from Supervisor Christensen as well that she'll be here to talk about.
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, Chair Wiener. Wanted to add some comments to Supervisor Avalos. Actually, our 2 offices were both drafting this legislation at the same time, unbeknownst to one another, and so I'm happy that we were able to introduce this together. As he had mentioned in 2002, when the Board of Supervisors originally passed the inclusionary housing program, inclusionary affordable housing program, an ordinance that is now replicated throughout cities across the country. It was one of our most successful initiatives in ensuring that the production of affordable housing occurred, and to also ensure that the private market rate developers are part of the solution in building units affordable to the vast majority of San Francisco residents. As I've said many times before, 60% of San Francisco residents qualify for affordable housing here in the city. The board intended this program to apply to all units built and explicitly stated that group housing was one of the types of housing which should apply under the inclusionary ordinance. It only became clear, as Supervisor Avalos mentioned, to our office last year that the planning department has been interpreting this ordinance differently because of a difference in how dwelling units are interpreted versus housing units, and because group housing is not considered under the umbrella of dwelling units. The zoning administrator has therefore been interpreting our ordinance as excluding group housing from this policy. This cleanup legislation just explicitly makes clear that it is group housing as defined under the housing code that is now included in the inclusionary housing ordinance, and that is not based off how we actually define dwelling units. This again became clear to us because we have 3 projects, developments moving through in District 6 that are group housing. It was then that we learned that they currently do not have to fulfill their inclusionary housing obligation. 1178 Folsom, 2 blocks away from one of our public schools, as well as 2 sites in the Tenderloin as well. Again, this is just to clarify what the board expressly articulated back in 2002, and it's just cleanup language.
Christensen.
Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Supervisors Avalos and Kim for this measure and for their patience with some potential additions to it. At the same time that they were working on this, my staff was also looking at some similar issues in commercial districts in the C3G and C3S zoning districts. The code gives additional floor area, or FAR, to projects in these districts for providing on-site BMR units. Unlike the rest of BMR units around the city, these units are only required to be affordable for 20 years, and they can also be for as much as 150 AMI with no specifications on unit size, mix, or rental versus ownership. So aligned with the intention of the Avalos and Kim ordinance is to clarify and provide technical cleanup regarding group housing and inclusionary housing requirements. I move to make amendments that seek to do the same regarding inclusionary housing in the C3 zoning districts. This amendment would require BMR units in the C3G and C3S zones to be permanent affordable housing at no more than 120% AMI for rental and 150% AMI for ownership, creating permanent middle-income housing. Further technical clarification is also included to bring these units into the same process for approval as the rest of the inclusionary housing program and to make them family-sized units. The Planning Commission recommended that these additional units are also be subject to impact fees, which we've added. This is a good policy and a cleaner process for these projects, and we've been advised that the time to do it is to add it to this legislation if the supervisors will accept that amendment.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, the good thing about this discussion happening now is that we're actually building group housing in a broader way in San Francisco. I think when the inclusionary housing ordinance, I actually checked with some people back in when the inclusionary housing ordinance was first adopted, and none of them could recall group housing ever coming up as a topic of discussion. And I am assuming that that is because at the time the only group housing that was being built was probably 100% below market rate housing, senior housing or emancipated foster youth and so forth. And so the fact that we're seeing a broader type of group housing being produced, to me, is a good thing. In moving past this housing crisis, we need to be building a lot of different kinds of housing, and group housing, both BMR group housing and non-BMR group housing, in my view, is a very, very important part of the mix, and we need to make sure that we're allowing group housing of various types to be built. I know that at least one group housing project that was in the pipeline when this legislation was introduced, converted to a more traditional apartment or condo building because they said that it no longer penciled out for their financing, and so we lost a group housing project. I have heard from other group housing developers that it can pencil out. So I think it's a little bit unclear here, but clearly this having the inclusionary housing ordinance apply to group housing does increase the costs of the projects. That's not to say that we shouldn't do it. I think the BMR program, our inclusionary housing program, is a very, very important one and one I support. What I would like to suggest, and after public comment I'll make a motion to amend, is that we have some additional flexibility in terms of AMI. Right now, as I understand it, for rental group housing under the proposed ordinance, it would be up to 50% of area median income. I would like to propose that the maximum area median income for rental BMR housing be 90%, which is into the moderate income range. And for ownership, up to 120% of area median income, which is at the top end of moderate income. So taking our group housing inclusionary program and extending it into moderate income, we know from a recent report that was issued and many reports over the years around the production of housing for different income levels. We produce a lot of housing for high end. We produce not enough. But a decent amount of housing for low income, although we need much more, and almost nothing for the middle. Very, very little of moderate income housing. Group housing is more affordable because of its size than other types of housing. And if we increase the AMI to that moderate income range, I think that'll be helpful. 90% of AMI, as I understand it, for a single person, and group housing would often be single people living in a unit, is $64,200 as the maximum income. For a household of two, it's about $73,000. Household of three, $82,000, and a household of four, $91,000. And so I will make that motion at the conclusion of public comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Avalos.
I think Supervisor Kim's next.
I'm sorry. Okay, Supervisor Kim.
Clear out the...
I can go next.
I don't know. Julie, I need you to clear out.
They're not clearing out.
Okay, Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I just wanted to, this is my first time hearing of this amendment, so I just want to clarify with the author of the amendment. So you would like to go up to 90% of AMI, specifically just for the inclusionary requirement for group housing, or for our inclusionary program in general?
For just to this, for only for group housing, up to 90% of AMI for rental and 120 for ownership.
Okay. So I just have a couple of comments on that. First of all, I want to agree with Supervisor Wiener that the reason why this hasn't been an issue until now is because we haven't seen proposals for group housing in our pipeline until recently. Our housing market is so hot now that micro units and group housing, often with limited facilities like kitchens and bathrooms, are now conceived of as being very profitable types of housing units and are getting the financing that they never got before. That's something that we've been thinking a lot about, and being that that's the case, they should certainly be able to be a part of our inclusionary housing program and part of our affordable housing solution, as other market rate developers are. And just to give an example of how well these units are proposed to be doing, the two group housing proposals that are proposed in the Tenderloin on 351 Turk Street and 145 Leavenworth is actually proposing to market these units to individuals that make 150% AMI. So these are market rate SRO rooms, typically that have gone towards working class, low income individuals. These units are going to be marketed to people that are making, a single individual that makes at least $107,000 a year. So these are really high-end micro units that they are that they are proposing to build, and for that reason, I think it's important that they be able to include inclusionary housing in their projects. I think that we are all in agreement about that. On the second piece about raising the AMI specifically just for group housing, I think that that's premature at this point. We will be having a discussion on a concept called the dial. It's something that we've been in discussions over the last year with the mayor's housing work group, where we are actually contemplating allowing developers to perhaps build more units at a higher AMI, or to build less units than the 12% if they're more heavily subsidized. I think that this is a long-term conversation. If we're going to raise the AMI for one category of housing, we should be looking at it in the broad conversation of all the types of housing proposals that we have, and that conversation, I think, is most appropriately had when the dial is introduced. And if we are going to allow a developer to raise the AMI from 55%, which is the standard today, to 90%, then we should have a conversation of whether they should be supplying more units than the same number, being that they don't have to subsidize those units as heavily as they do with 55% AMI. So I'm open to the conversation. I'd like to have it, but I think that it would be premature to have that discussion today for two reasons. One, the policy discussion will be occurring in the future. Second, there is a benefit that we are conferring to the developer by not ensuring that they are as deeply subsidizing these units. And so if we are going to do that, we should examine whether we should require them to do more units at 90% AMI. So I will not be supporting the amendment today. I do know that Supervisor Avalos has a number of amendments that came as recommendations from the Planning Commission. On the second set of amendments that Supervisor Christensen has introduced, I will be supporting those. I think that it makes sense to close the loophole on that affordable housing program. That's part of our C3 program, which allows greater density in exchange for moderate income units being part of the inclusionary program. I think it makes sense to close the loophole and ensure that those units remain permanently affordable, that we target 2 and 3 bedroom units, because we're seeing that the market's actually already providing studio units at 150% AMI at rental, so that's not a need. So I'm glad that Supervisor Christensen's office is examining that as including that in our legislation. So I know that's not part of group housing, but they're both part of our inclusionary affordable housing program, and so we'll be supporting those 2 sets of amendments.
Guest number 4.
Thank you. That's me, guest number 4, Supervisor Avalos. My office was reaching out to Supervisor Wiener, your office, to hear about any concerns you might have about this. So clearly you hadn't talked to staff about these amendments coming forward. This is the first time I'm hearing it. To me, they kind of undermine the whole arguments that have been being put forward about group housing being affordable by design. We're actually, if we're creating another special part of the inclusionary to cover group housing for rental and ownership, then we're really saying that these units need to be not built-in affordable, but we have to create this special accommodation to make them affordable. I believe that they should be treated like every other type of housing so that we can apply inclusionary. And I don't think we should be making any kind of special arrangements in our inclusionary just for group housing situations as well. So I'm not voting today, but I don't support necessarily the amendments that you're proposing today. And I also want to echo the comments of Supervisor Kim about what's being planned in terms of dialing up the level of affordability as we're increasing density. That's the discussion that'll be going forward. It's part of our plan of getting to 33% by 2020. And I think that we would be amiss in trying to create changes that would not be consistent with what we're going to be doing as a city that has broad support among the Board of Supervisors. So I don't support the amendments that you're discussing. There are other members of the committee want to speak, and we can go on to presentation from staff.
Well, let's go ahead to presentation of the staff. I can save my remarks for afterwards. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Cohen and Supervisors. Kim Yahadan, I'm Planning Department staff. The Planning Commission had the ordinance proposed by Supervisor Avalos and Kim before them on July 2nd, and the Commission approved the ordinance to apply inclusion requirements to group housing and supported that notion. The Commission found that they did not have enough information before them to approve or disapprove Supervisor Christensen's amendments, so they wanted those amendments to go back to them. As for the inclusionary housing application to group housing, we thank Supervisor Avalos and Kim for taking the initiative to clarify the planning code requirements in that regards. And as you mentioned, the planning code has some conflicting language about that, and this ordinance would fix that conflicting language so that group housing projects would also be subject to inclusionary program. The planning department noticed this conflict recently because, as some of you mentioned, group housing projects previously were homeless shelters, supportive housing, youth shelters, and they were all already exempt from the inclusionary program because they were 100% affordable. But more recently, we're getting different types of group housing projects that are more like private bedroom suites. They have some limited kitchen facilities as well, so it's more of a market rate housing, and we noticed that the code has that conflicting language. The Planning Commission also recommended approval of the staff proposed amendments. The first amendment is about quality of life requirements. Group housing currently is exempt from exposure requirements. The planning code has higher density, allows higher density for group housing, also exempts group housing from rear yard requirements in certain circumstances, and also they have smaller open space requirements. And staff found that the quality of life requirements should apply to group housing similar to other types of housing that are being proposed. So the proposed amendment is to apply exposure requirements to group housing similar to what's in the code currently for smaller units such as accessory dwelling units. Also, staff proposed another recommendation which was approved by the Commission to incentivize on-site affordable inclusionary group housing units and so that the inclusionary units in a group housing building would be exempt from density calculations, and this would allow certain projects in areas of the city that currently have density controls to be more financially feasible. And then lastly, the last amendment is about pricing of group housing units, so that the proposal states that group housing bedrooms that are smaller than 350 square feet, they would be priced at 75% of a studio. Currently, most CD uses SRO rates for as 75% of a studio for pricing of inclusionary units, and the original ordinance proposed the same rate for group housing, 75% of a studio, but the department found that there's no maximum limit on the size of a group housing bedroom, and therefore we wanted to create that distinction. So group housing bedrooms of smaller than 350 square feet would be priced as 75% of a studio, and group housing bedrooms of larger than 350, they would be priced equal to the pricing of a studio. So that concludes the amendments proposed by the Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Hadadan. And just want to, for the record, say that I am supportive of the amendment from Supervisor Christensen as well.
All right, thank you very much. Why don't we go to public comment? Is there any member of the public that'd like to speak on item number 6? Please come up at this time. You will be given 2 minutes.
Sue Hester, I support the Avalos and Kim legislation. I ask you to seriously ask the city attorney whether you can even entertain the legislation that's proposed by Supervisor Christensen and Supervisor Wiener without sending it back to the Planning Commission. At the Planning Commission, there was a discussion of the Christensen amendment, and that discussion was very explicit. They didn't have enough information to go up or down on it, and they were not taking a position on it. The planning code requires amendments to the planning code be considered by the Planning Commission before they can be considered by the Board of Supervisors. What they did when they considered it, by structuring their vote and their discussion on the Christensen amendment, say, we have nothing that enables us to take a position because there's no code language. They took a position that it had to come back to the Planning Commission. And if you amend the legislation with any amendment was not considered by the Planning Commission, Supervisor Wiener's amendment or Supervisor Christensen's amendment, I believe the planning code requires that it goes back to the Planning Commission and not forward to the Board of Supervisors. I am not your attorney. He is your attorney. Because that discussion happened with the city attorney sitting in the hearing and advising the commission about what they were doing. I think it was either Kate Stacy or Susan Cleveland, one or the other. I don't think you can send out either of the two amendments that you think you can do. The ones that came from the Planning Commission, you can do. They have been before the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Kim Mastero. I'm a resident of San Francisco, and I was raised mostly military family. About hats are not proper to wear inside, but today I wear this hat in front of you in respect and honor, and that I'm also a board member of the Tenant Association in the Tenderloin. And they gave me this hat as a present for all supporting me and for what I come here to do in support of them. So I'm here today very, very strongly requesting that you pass this new ordinance that stops this gap. I do not agree with the new amendment today for the 90% BMI. I agree with Commissioner Kim that further conversation needs to be done on that. I have been a victim of domestic violence, which caused me to become homeless. I was then further victimized by the shelter system here in San Francisco. Had it not been for my 22 years of accounting experience and knowledge to help myself, I would still be homeless or dead, waiting for that help that is promised and never is real, like so many others who still are in those shelters. Show the people who rely on you that you are serious about making real changes in our great city. Create more affordable housing. Give the down and struggling, but not out, a chance to get their lives back and not have to live on the streets fighting for their lives every day. I'm here today to request as a representative of your constituents that you help them and pass this inclusionary housing ordinance. Let in the companies that want to invest in us, the people, make it a good city, that want it to beautify, to take care of the people, not those that only come here to make a buck on us. Make us a city with 0% homelessness and a place where families can afford to live and work, both poor and rich. Come and listen to some of the people of the Tenderloin. There is an event coming up. I invite all of you to come hear our stories. Here are.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Wendy Click, and I'm from Hospitality House. I'm here to fully support this legislation, and in your file, you should have at least 63 letters that I have gathered in the Tenderloin and the Soma and 6th Street corridor also supporting this legislation. There are many in the pipeline that are calling themselves group housing, finding a loophole. In reality, they're just luxury SROs. The existing law says that all housing projects, including 10 or more units, which are intended to provide long-term housing to individuals and households, to follow the inclusionary ordinance. I believe these group housings are 10 or more units. They are intended for a long-term housing, and they're also for folks that are individual and household. Last week when we was at the Planning Commission, they heard about the project on 351 Turk and 146 Leavenworth. And they also said that they were intended to be for individuals and small households. This is a requirement for all inclusionary housing ordinance. I ask you today to recommend the amendment to the full board. Thank you.
Supervisors, Madam Chair, thank you. I'm Brad Self. I live on Turk Street at Hyde, which is a half a block away from the big project behind the former Y. I support the amendment to the code, and would ask you that you do as well. I would ask, relative to Supervisor Wiener's suggested amendment, how many people would actually legally be able to apply for and live in one of the group housing bedrooms? That would be 350. If you applied for a one-bedroom apartment, for instance, like at the Franciscan Towers, legally 3 people can live there. So that would apply to the income requirements for that project. That's about it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon or maybe evening. Supervisors, my name is Alexandra Goldman. I'm a community planner with the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, and I'm here today to encourage you to recommend this item to the full board. TNDC definitely believes that this was a loophole in the inclusionary housing ordinance that was overlooked because people didn't think that wealthy individuals or small households would have any interest in living in units that are as small as the group housing units. However, today we're seeing that is a reality, and so we encourage you to apply the same inclusionary requirements to this form of housing. In the Tenderloin, we have a lot of small lots. TNDC definitely supports the development of these lots into new housing, but we believe that this development must be equitable. A lot of these small lots don't make a lot of sense to turn into larger housing projects with full-size units, so we're anticipating seeing even more group housing projects in the neighborhood. We have this one project that's been mentioned at 145 Leavenworth and 361 Turk. There's another one that's been discussed on Turk Street near Aunt Charlie's that's supposed to be group housing, and we definitely plan on seeing more in the pipeline. And we really think that it's only fair for development in the Tenderloin to be affordable to some of the people who live in the Tenderloin. And on that level, we support keeping the AMI 55%. Even that amount isn't affordable to a lot of Tenderloin residents, but 90% certainly would be affordable to even less. In the sort of process of approving this group housing project at 145 Leavenworth and 361 Turk, a lot of Tenderloin residents showed up. A lot of people showed a lot of interest in keeping the neighborhood affordable and being really engaged in a planning process that has excluded them. So hopefully you'll be listening to these voices and encourage the fact that Tenderloin residents really want to get involved in planning and let the city know that we support affordable housing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Hi, supervisors. Thank you for hearing us today. My name is Colleen Rebecca. I work at St. Anthony Foundation. We've submitted letters of support for this legislation both to the Planning Commission and to the sponsors of the bill, and we are here in support. I just hearing for the first time about this amendment related to the 90% AMI. I can't, not having talked to our folks at St. Anthony's, I can't say for sure, but I cannot imagine that we would be in support of that type of an amendment. I think that one of the considerations is that inclusionary housing is supposed to allow people who cannot afford market rate housing to be able to afford to live in housing. A lot of our social workers at St. Anthony's, they help people who have very, very, very low incomes. I always get tripped up on low, extremely low, whatever, especially since my income is very low according to AMI. But our guests, the people at the lowest income levels, cannot afford to live in market rate SROs anymore. People at 90% of AMI can. Doing just a little back of the envelope math, I think that it could be challenging for people at 55% AMI to be able to afford an SRO at market rate today without that support. So I can't imagine that we would support changing the AMI, but we are in support of the legislation in its current form. Thanks. Next speaker.
Hi, Jennifer Friedenbach, Executive Director of the Coalition on Homelessness. We're an organization that has been deeply rooted in the Tenderloin and has been there for the past 27 years. And for the Tenderloin community, we have really deep housing problems, and they tend much towards the very extremely low income. I would guess that just about every garage in the Tenderloin is occupied. We have a lot of overcrowding. We have, of course, a tremendous amount of people who are Tenderloin residents that are without housing. You can see that any day, the effects of that severe housing crisis in that neighborhood. I don't think anyone dreamed around group housing ever being imagined as high-end housing. And I would imagine that the real residents of this high-end housing would actually not be permanent residents, but it would be used as corporate rooms for corporations who are housing people temporarily at those high of incomes. I can't imagine they're even going to be living there year-round as San Francisco residents. That said, we really support the legislation by Kim and Avalos. We think it's kind of a no-brainer. Like they should have to have some, at least a small percentage of the units be affordable. This is the first hearing about the amendment by Supervisor Wiener. And without having gone through a process, I can say that we would definitely oppose that. We were quickly looking at it, and 90% of AMI would be market rate. And that's already those folks are able to and are renting residential hotel rooms that have gone up in price already. So there's really not a strong need for that level of housing. There is a strong need at the lower ends, at least below 55%, and of course from our perspective even lower than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Hello again. My name is Chirag Bhakta from the Mission SRO Collaborative and Dolores Community Services, but also speaking as a born and raised resident of the Tenderloin. First of all, I want to thank Supervisors Kim and Avalos for putting this forward. And we want to say yes to this legislation without any amendments. Because what we're seeing in the mission at a lot of the SROs are a rise of so-called tech dormitories and startup communities. One former SRO that we used to have tenants in has now been fully converted, and they are self-described as a queer tech commune. And do not rent to a lot of or does not rent to any of the SRO tenants that we know. And we're also seeing other SROs at risk of being sold and converted into group housing. We hear from tenants all the time that there are real estate agents and architects coming into their buildings, into their rooms, for purposes of conversion. Right. And, as high-end group housing is growing around the city, we need to close this loophole, add more actual below-market rate housing that is affordable. As a nonprofit worker in San Francisco, I can't afford 90% AMI. And so we ask you to pass this legislation, move this legislation forward without any of the proposed amendments. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Supervisors. My name is Fernando Martí with the Council of Community Housing Organizations. Thank you, Supervisors Avalos and Kim, for introducing this piece of legislation. It is much needed, and we hope that you will recommend it to the full board for passage, as is without the proposed amendments. I wanted to speak very briefly about the two amendments. The first one that was raised by Supervisor Wiener it raises the idea once again about middle-income housing and whether this is an appropriate place for that kind of level. Frankly, I'd like to say I think that raising the AMI level for a group housing situation to 90% AMI is quite ludicrous. If you take, I think, $64,000, which was quoted as the AMI level, or the income level for someone at 90%, divide that by 12 for 12 months, divide it by a third, you would be expected to pay $1,777 a month for a group housing situation. So if I could have the overhead slide, if possible.
You go on. So you're saying, Fernando, you're saying that $1,700 is unreasonable for group that anyone should pay.
Well, so what I've got here on the slide is a
overhead SFGov.
Yeah, that is. Let me move that down a little bit. That is the new Panoramic, which is about to open. Micro units at $1,995, just a little above that 90% AMI level. And if you want to share a house in Nob Hill, $1,850, which is just a little above 90% AMI. So that's just to say that's fine right now. As soon as the market changes a little bit, the Mayor's Office of Housing will be stuck trying to rent a 90% AMI unit when group housing might actually be going for something a little bit lower than that. And then second, about the Christensen Amendment, I think, as Sue Hester pointed out earlier, it really needs to go through a process in which the Planning Commission has a chance to review the legislation and understand it. There are some good things that seem to be in there, but nobody has seen it yet.
Thank you so much. Okay. Supervisor Kim? Supervisor Avalos?
Thank you. It's my understanding that the Christensen Amendment has been discussed and seen at the Planning Commission, and just to clarify, get some clarification from Deputy City Attorney John Givner.
Excuse me, Supervisor Avalos, before you go any further, I just want to close public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you did that already.
No. So, seeing that there are no other members in the public that'd like to comment at this time, public comment will be closed. Please continue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So just a question for Mr. Givner. There's a discussion about what's happened at Planning Commission relative to amendments that are proposed. I believe Christensen's has an amendment that was discussed at Planning Commission. I was actually texted by Planning Commissioner members while a discussion was going on. I didn't get the text till after I got into cell phone range. But then there's also amendments from Mr. Weiner, Supervisor Weiner, that are due as well that weren't discussed in planning. Just your thoughts about what could go forward and what can't.
Sure. Deputy City Attorney John Givner. I should say at the outset that any of these sets of amendments will require another hearing at land use. So if you make any of the amendments, your Supervisor Avalos, Supervisor Christensen, Supervisor Wieners, or any combination, you'll have to continue the item for additional public comment, which will be noticed with all the language of those amendments. As to planning, the Planning Commission did consider Supervisor Christensen's amendments in concept. It was the proposal was described in the staff's report to the Commission, and the Commission discussed it, but concluded that it needed more information, and the Commission said that it wanted to hear the item again and to bring it back before it goes to the board. Legally, the Board of Supervisors has to send back to the Planning Commission any material modifications, amendments that make material modifications that the Planning Commission hasn't already had the opportunity to review. Here, the Planning Commission has had the opportunity to review the proposal, although they didn't have the draft language in front of them. You could, as a policy matter, send these amendments back to planning for additional review, but you're not legally required to. Supervisor Wiener's proposed amendments were not specifically discussed at the Planning Commission, but those amendments would have the effect of making less restrictive rule on the property owners, or in terms of the affordability levels. So the idea is that the Planning Commission considered changing the ordinance from no inclusionary requirement to full inclusionary requirement, and got into some of the weeds about the levels of affordability, as one of your amendments discusses, Supervisor Avalos. And Supervisor Wiener's proposal is somewhere in between no inclusionary and inclusionary, matching all other housing. So, consistent with our usual advice about what a material modification is, Supervisor Wiener's proposed amendment would not require additional planning review either. So that was a lot of words, but the bottom line is that any of these amendments would require another hearing at the board. None of them would require going back to planning.
Thank you. Again, I have already been discussing the amendments from Supervisor Christensen, and I actually have been okay with them as they've been described to me. But the new ones from Supervisor Wiener, I don't believe really fit the spirit of what we're trying to achieve, especially that we'll be creating a new, what appears to be a new standard for what inclusionary housing and AMI would be for inclusionary housing relative to group housing, but that would certainly change dramatically what our inclusionary housing program is. And this legislation's intent was really to clarify that inclusionary housing would apply to group housing, not create a special category of inclusionary housing for group housing. So those would be my hope for the committee to accept the amendments that I have proposed. I'm supportive of Supervisor Christensen's amendments, and I hope the committee can move those forward. Thank you.
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. Just want to make some additional comments. I also want to clarify that the Commission did hear Supervisor Christensen's amendments, even if they were not written out. I got a copy of the language today. I was curious, though. I know that there was some concerns that were expressed, but were there any specific concerns that were expressed beyond that they just didn't have more time to consider it?
Kimia Haram, planning staff. I don't believe so. It was mostly the concerns was about not having the ordinance before them, and also that it was not necessarily completely related to the group housing amendments, but nothing that I can recall.
So, and maybe this is a question for the city attorney. I do agree that they're kind of two different types of legislation, although both under the inclusionary affordable housing program. If you could just, make some comments about including both in this legislation.
Sure. Deputy City Attorney John Givner again. Under our city charter, every ordinance must relate to a single subject, and that's been defined by the courts to mean that they're reasonably germane to a single subject. And here, certainly, these amendments are reasonably germane to the same subject of affordable housing and group housing. And so they can move forward in a single ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Just to add on to the conversation about Supervisor Wiener's amendment, I made my comments earlier that I think that this conversation is more appropriately had when we introduce the dial, because it does allow private developers to opt in to produce more moderate income housing, but also more units at a lower subsidy, or to produce lower income units at deeper subsidies and fewer of those. And I think that is the time to have this conversation, and that whatever we decide should impact all types of housing development, not just group housing. Want to add on to what Fernando Marti said. We have a number of group housing units that are already online that are basically marketed for roughly at 90% AMI. So if we do allow group housing developers to provide all of their inclusionary units at 90% AMI, it may be not much lower or perhaps even higher than what they're going for at the market. I think that we should be consistent. 55% AMI is what we require on site at 12%. It is what we require of all housing developers. I don't think that we should differentiate between group housing or other types of market rate housing. And I just want to reiterate that I am a strong supporter of ensuring that we are building more moderate income housing. We know that we are not fulfilling this need at the level that we should be. And an example that I'll give recently with Seawall Lot 337, where the community negotiated with the Giants on 40% affordable and middle income housing. Key in that negotiation was that we ensured that they still provided the 12% on site that every other market rate developer has to provide. So 12% of that 40% is going to be marketed to individuals and households at 45% and 55% of AMI. That was a key part of the negotiation. It was something that we did not want to let go, that there was a consistent standard across the board that all of our market rate developers have to comply with. And I think that we should ensure that we do that here in the group housing. There are other ways that I think that we can be creative about increasing our market rate, our moderate income type of housing. In this proposal, for example, at Seawall Lot 337, 28% of the units will be for individuals and households making between 90 and 150% AMI. This is unprecedented. We will have never built this much middle-income housing, and I absolutely support it. That being said, we have a set policy, 12% across the board, and I'd like to keep that as it is for our group housing inclusionary ordinance before us.
Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, and I really do appreciate those remarks, and it's a good discussion. And the fact is that we're producing, even though there have been some projects recently that are coming forward with moderate income, we're producing very, very little moderate income housing overall. This is even at the low end of moderate housing, 90%. And in terms of consistency, I mean, right now, group housing is completely exempt from the inclusionary housing ordinance. and it's being proposed to be brought in. And we know that at least one group housing project has now converted to non-group housing because it no longer penciled out for them. And so in addition to providing moderate income housing, this will help group housing projects come along. I'm glad that the dial discussion is happening. It's long overdue, and that will happen when it happens, and I'm sure it will be a great dialogue. But right now we have before us this group housing ordinance, and I think 90% is a good number.
Supervisor Kim, before we acknowledge you, I want to ask a couple questions of you. When do you anticipate the dial legislation to be introduced?
Our office is currently in conversation with the mayor's office and Supervisor Farrell's office. This has been a discussion since the Housing Trust Fund in 2012, and that legislation is coming to form actually now in this month. So I anticipate introduction this month or early in the fall.
So is it currently being drafted, or is it in its final?
It is currently being drafted.
Okay.
I know Mayor's Office of Housing would like to introduce it before legislative session ends, which is July 28th. At worst case scenario, because of the legislative recess, we'll be introducing in September. So, this conversation is literally coming on the heels of this amendment that is before us today. What I wanted to respond to was that the comment that we're making a change, that group housing was completely exempt. In the 2002 ordinance, the board expressly stated that group housing would comply under the inclusionary ordinance. What occurred later with the interpretation by the planning department, which I completely understand, it's not to lay blame on the planning department, it's just that our code has multiple definitions of housing versus dwelling units. Group housing isn't a dwelling unit, but it's housing. And so the planning department did the best that they could to interpret the ordinance. It really did not have to interpret the ordinance until recently when we had group housing projects come before us. And so there was a long period of time when that question really didn't come before the planning department. So to say that we are suddenly exempting something that wasn't exempt before, I just have to counter that, because the original ordinance in 2002 expressly stated that group housing would comply with this inclusionary affordable housing program.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the discussion. So let's see, as a matter of order, let's take Supervisor Christensen's amendment first.
I'll move adoption of those amendments.
Thank you very much. Move for adoption. All right. Supervisor Kim seconds that. And so that motion is unanimous and passes.
And I will move Supervisor Avalos' amendments as well.
All right. Supervisor Avalos has a motion. I believe that also is going to be a unanimous decision as well. Both those amendments move forward. That leaves Supervisor Wiener's amendments.
And then I move the amendments that I described earlier regarding 90% AMI for rental, 120 for ownership.
All right, thank you very much. Let's do a roll call vote on this. Oh, Supervisor Avalos has something to say.
I'm just not clear on the language on that, how it will be done. I know our ordinance doesn't actually list AMI, but it references the inclusionary program elsewhere.
It's an oral amendment, so the city attorney would draft it, and it would specify that BMR group housing units for rental would be affordable to those applicants making up to 90% of AMI, and for ownership up to 120% of AMI. So it's an oral amendment.
Thank you. And colleagues, I do appreciate supporting the amendments that I brought here today, and that Supervisor Wiener had made the motion for those to be accepted, but I cannot accept the motion from Supervisor Wiener.
All right, so the motion has been made by Supervisor Wiener, seconded by Supervisor Cohen. Let's roll call for this vote, please.
Okay. Supervisor Wiener's amendment. Supervisor Kim? Kim, no. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. And Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Supervisor Cohen, aye.
Thank you.
2 ayes, 1 no.
This motion passes.
Now I move to forward the ordinance as amended to the full board with positive recommendation.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I move to continue the ordinance as amended by 1 week.
Sure.
By 1 week.
1 week. All right. That motion is moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, does that work on the calendar?
Yes. So that moves back to the 20th.
That's correct.
Okay, yes.
All right. Thank you. Unanimously supported. All right. Madam Clerk, is there any other business before this committee?
There's no further business.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.